Chapter 1679. The fruits on the table had also rotted and emitted a foul smell. The man laughed sinisterly. "You are no longer of any use. Hurry up and die." The woman stretched out her hand and bent it in the air. Suddenly, the woman's fingers turned into black nails and pierced through the man's body. Black blood splashed out from the man's body. It attacked Yumachin. Yumachin stood at the door and smiled coldly. He drew a line at the door with his peachwood sword. A golden line appeared under his feet. The black blood retreated when it encountered the golden color. The female ghost also seemed to have encountered the most unbearable attack. Her hands grabbed her neck tightly. Her rotten face and empty eyes were extremely distorted. "He killed me. I loved him so much. Why did he kill me?" The female ghost knelt and kept pulling at her hair with her fingers. There was more blood on her neck. However, the surging, stinking blood was unable to flow past the doorway at all. Yumachin pointed the peachwood sword to the ground. All the walls of the room shook violently. The joints of the female ghost's body twisted. She crawled on the ground with her elbows, her black hair wriggling with blood. It was indescribably disgusting. Yumachin was used to the forms of ghosts, so he was not moved at all. He said, "You are too noisy." The female ghost was stunned. Yumachin repeated, "Too noisy." The function of the hotel was to sleep. The little celestial master had paid, so the hotel had to provide the same service. That was why it was so noisy. He could complain about the owner of the hotel. Of course, this guest also needed to be complained about. She was too uncivilized. Yumachin took out a handkerchief, stepped on the peachwood sword, and looked at the female ghost indifferently. "What grievances do you have? Close the door and cry by yourself. But if you cry too loudly, you even hit the wall with your head to disturb the guest next door. This is unreasonable. How could you disturb others like this? You have no morals at all." The female ghost twisted and lay on the ground, staring at Yumachin. She stretched out her finger and laughed. "Come in. Come in and kill me." Yumachin sneered, "Are you crazy? I can just squat at your door and set up a formation to kill you. Why should I enter your door? This hotel is so strange." He was used to being vigilant and would not let his guard down just because there was only one ghost. Furthermore, this room was where that ghost had died. It was also the domain of this ghost. It would take a lot of effort to kill a ghost in her domain. He couldn't be bothered. If she hadn't been so noisy, he wouldn't have bothered with her at all. He had seen so many ghosts that he didn't care about them anymore. "I almost forgot." Yumachin slapped his head helplessly. He was also a ghost now. Yumachin slashed at the door with his peachwood sword, and a golden mark appeared. Finally, fear appeared on the female ghost's face. She curled into a ball and stared at Yumachin. Just as Yumachin was about to arrange the array, he heard the sound of the door being pushed open. He paused. A warm body rushed over from behind and bumped into his back. A crying and trembling voice sounded, "Yumachin, where did you go?" Her voice was extremely helpless, as if he was her savior. Her hands were around his waist, and her soft body was pressed against his cold back, warming his body. Yumachin was distracted, and the blood spread across the golden line. In an instant, he appeared in the blood-red room. Oh. Chapter 1680. While he was distracted, the female ghost successfully pulled him into this room. Wei Bai, who was sleeping soundly, was suddenly jolted awake by an electric shock. She found that Yumachin had disappeared. Her brain was also numbed by the electric shock. If Yumachin ran away, Was she like a roasted chicken shocked by electricity? Every cell in her body felt like it was being roasted. With great difficulty, she finally got out of bed with the perseverance of a long journey. She knocked open the door and rushed to Yumachian's side to hug him. She really used up all her strength. So when she caught her breath, she found that the place she was in was not right. Why did she come to a bloody room if she was not in the corridor? The layout of this room was similar to the room next to hers. But the atmosphere here was too gloomy. Even the color of the lights was a dark red. She saw that the door outside the room was also blood red. It was as if she had been transported from a normal world into an unknown and extremely terrifying space. A chill climbed from Wei Bai's feet to the top of her head. She hated horror movies the most. Especially horror movies. Yumachian finally turned around helplessly and reached out to touch her forehead. He frowned and said, "You can't do anything right. Can't you understand the feng shui of this place? How can you run around like this?" He had set up an array in her room. The floor, the walls, the ceiling, and even the door were sealed. No trace of yin energy could disturb her. She could actually wake up and run out rashly. He had forgotten to add a lock outside the door. If he walked further away and did not come out, she would have been eaten by ghosts. It was simply infuriating. No, infuriating. Wei Bai covered her head with both hands. She was stunned. "I saw that you were not here, so I came out to look for you." Yumachian's fingers paused and his dark eyes were stunned. His fingers poked her forehead. It was warm to the touch. Looking at her worried and teary eyes, he hesitated for a moment and did not continue poking. Then, his voice softened. "All right, this is not a good place. Let's go out. Lend me some of your yang qi." He could deal with this female ghost. But he kept feeling that something was wrong with this place, so he didn't go all out. His intuition had always been accurate. His many years of experience in dealing with ghosts had also made him much calmer. When he was young, he was competitive, reckless, and troublemaker. He was old now. He could borrow some yang qi so that he could use it when necessary. After all, yang qi was the best weapon against ghosts. He was in a special state, which was why he could live with the help of yang energy. Other ghosts did not have this ability. Wei Bai nodded without hesitation and didn't ask why. She immediately stood on her tiptoes and held his face with both hands. She leaned forward and kissed his thin lips. Yumachian's lips felt warm as he stared at her blankly. Her warm lips passed through his teeth, the tip of his tongue, and into his body. Her lowered eyelashes trembled. Her beautiful and clear eyes were like a pool of clear water, but there was warmth in them. Yumachian couldn't breathe, but he also felt that he was suffocating. Maybe it was because the yang qi was too strong. Yumachian reached out and put his hand on her shoulder, wanting to push her away. But she suddenly let go of him. Yumachian's lips felt cold. He frowned, not used to it. Wei Bai immediately said, "Is it not enough?" Yumachian opened his mouth and was about to say that it was enough. A kiss sealed his lips once again. Yumachian, then he silently pushed her hand away and landed on her shoulder. He just pressed down and didn't do anything. It was like a hug. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 15. At https://www.sashu.com/ to read the full article at https://www.sashu.com to TXT download at https://www.sashu.com to read on. Calm. Chapter 1681. After Wei Wei Bai finished kissing him, she hid behind Yu Ma Qian and reached out to grab his arm tightly. Yu Ma Qian originally wanted to correct her incorrect way of giving him yang energy. But the warmth from her fingers made him lower his eyelashes. For some reason, he suddenly stopped talking. Maybe this place was too dangerous. So it was not suitable to talk about such a detailed topic. Wei Wei Bai said carefully behind him, "Where is this?" Yu Ma Qian looked around, then held Wei Wei Bai's hand and walked out. In a hotel. However, when the female ghost died, it was in a hotel during that time period. Wei Wei Bai's voice trembled. Really? After they walked out, Wei Wei Bai found that it was still a room. It was exactly the same room as the one they were in just now. No, it should be said. They were back in the room just now. Yu Ma Qian was not surprised at all. Once they entered the scene of the ghost's death. If they could not solve it, they would linger here forever. And in this place, the female ghost's ability would be the strongest. Yu Ma Qian raised the peachwood sword and said calmly, "It's okay, it's just a simple array formation to break through. Haven't you learned it before?" Wei Wei Bai. No. Yu Ma Qian was silent for a moment before saying, "What did you learn?" Wei Wei Bai, swindling. Such a straightforward answer made Yu Ma Qian not know how to respond for a moment. He sighed helplessly. It was such a waste. Yu Ma Qian suddenly reached out and stuffed the peachwood sword in his hand into her hand. Then he pushed her forward. Wei Wei Bai grabbed the peachwood sword and looked at Yu Ma Qian in horror. At this time, Yu Ma Qian was not by her side, and she was so scared that her legs went weak. Yu Ma Qian crossed his arms and floated in the air. He looked at her seriously. "Learn it for me. Those despicable people from the Imperial Path sect." He couldn't even teach a disciple with good potential. She was like a little crooked tree that had been taught from a crooked forest. If it was a normal tree with a crooked neck, Yu Ma Qian wouldn't have much of a reaction. But even if Wei Wei Bai was a crooked tree, it was of the best variety. When he saw it, he couldn't help but want to straighten her. Wei Wei Bai holds the peachwood sword and shakes it like Parkinson's disease. Learn what? Yu Ma Qian faintly raised his eyebrows and automatically entered the strict teacher mode. Of course it's to learn the ghost catching technique. As a ghost catcher, how can you not know anything? Wei Wei Bai immediately said, "You've got it wrong. I'm a scammer." For example, those scammers on TV who are caught selling pyramid schemes every day and those who are detained for phone fraud are all in the same profession as me. Yu Ma Qian looked at her so self-righteous. So, it was hard to explain. For a moment, he actually didn't know how to refute. A good ghost catcher seedling was actually so self-deprecating. He helplessly used his fingers to support his forehead and sighed, "You're so talented, what a waste. How can you be so lazy?" After saying that, he suddenly disappeared. Wei Wei Bai, in the blood-red room, there were rotten fruits, and the silent table and chairs. The corridor outside the door was eerie and empty. Everything here seemed so strange and terrifying. As for her, she was going to stay here alone. Everything. The system said, "Don't worry, the male lead is hiding beside you." Wei Wei Bai didn't get electrocuted, but Yu Ma Qian was 1 meter away. Wei Wei Bai really couldn't control her teeth and started to tremble. "I'm the only one here." The. Chapter 1682. Even if Yu Ma Qian was pressed against her back, it was useless. Because she couldn't see. So she was afraid. Even if Yu Ma Qian was a ghost, Wei Wei Bai was used to seeing him for a long time. She even thought that he could fly. More importantly, Yu Ma Qian was an expert at catching ghosts. Looking at the past information, he was simply a super genius in the ghost-catching world. He could exorcise any malicious ghost. So after looking at the information, as long as she was by Yumachian's side, she felt safe. There was no need to be afraid of ghosts at all. Yumachian could catch them. But now, she was alone. This sudden fear was simply trembling from the bottom of her heart. She suddenly heard the sound of water falling to the ground. Based on this strange behavior, it couldn't be that a ghost was coming out, right? In the dark red room, a gust of cold wind mixed with a stench. Wei Wei Bai turned around and looked in the direction of the sound. She saw a female ghost in a blood-red dress standing on her left. Her face was pale, and her mouth was cracked to her ears. Her eyes were bulging, and there was a bloody wound on her neck. Blood kept flowing out and dripping to the ground. She revealed a dark smile and stuck out her tongue. "Why don't you love me, Wei Wei Bai? Because I can't afford to love you." The female ghost's swollen face was twisted in a smile. She reached out her fingers and wanted to strangle Wei Wei Bai's neck. Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened. The ghost movie she watched when she was young flashed across her mind. The memories of being locked in a dark closet. All kinds of horrible scenes attacked her like knives, cutting through her calmness and composure. When the female ghost's fingers touched her neck, the cold fingers emitted a stench. Wei Wei Bai's pupils dilated, and her body couldn't help but tremble. Almost instinctively, she thrust the peach wood sword in her hand forward. She was extremely afraid. She wasn't running away, but an explosive resistance. Wei Wei Bai stabbed the peach wood sword into the female ghost's body. The female ghost only lowered her head to look at the peach wood sword in her body. The peach wood sword was just an ordinary peach wood sword. It was useless. The female ghost laughed shrilly. Her fingers pinched Wei Wei Bai's neck. Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled violently, and her body shivered. The suffocation slowly made her vision blurred. Suddenly, she heard a soft sigh helplessly. The faint coldness made half her ears numb. "You're so stupid," he said. "Even if you smear a bit of your own blood on the sword, you can still stab her. How can you kill a ghost like that?" Bai Weiwei finally couldn't bear it anymore. She was so scared that tears came out. "Yumachian, I'm scared." This place overlapped with the shadow of her childhood. She couldn't control she didn't know that she was she. Surprisingly, the female ghost's fingers did not actually strangle her neck. The female ghost's fingers were covered by a slender, cold, and pale hand. Yumachian's figure slowly appeared behind Wei Wei Bai from his invisible state. His fingers were pinching the female ghost's hand. He didn't want the female ghost's fingers to have a chance to strangle Wei Wei Bai. Because he was pressed against her back, he could feel the fear that was running through her body. Was she that afraid of ghosts? So afraid that she didn't even know how to resist. Yumachian thought that if he disappeared, she would be able to work hard. He didn't expect that she would be so scared. A golden light appeared on Yumachian's fingertips. It was the yang qi she gave him. This golden light passed through the peach wood sword in an instant. Address of the full text, https://www.sashu.com. Download address of the full text, https://www.sashu.com. Reading, https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 1683. The female ghost let out a shrill cry as the peach wood sword in her body exploded with a huge force. The female ghost dissipated in an instant. The peach wood sword fell from mid-air and was easily caught by one hand. Yumachian frowned and said, "Next time, use the blood from your fingertips to dye the sword to attack." Her blood was the best weapon against ghosts. She didn't know how to use such a good weapon at all. Wei Wei Bai didn't make a sound, but her body froze as she endured it. Yu Ma Qian was a little confused. Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai finally turned around. She reached out her hands and hugged his waist tightly, burying her face in his cold chest. She almost cried out, "Where did you go?" Yu Ma Qian, she reached out and hit his chest. "Where did you go? I was scared to death. How could you suddenly run away?" This was the crying of a little girl. Yu Ma Qian didn't know how to respond at all. He was good at catching ghosts, but he was completely clueless when it came to coaxing girls. He just wanted to teach her the ability to survive and eat. Why was she blaming him? Wei Wei Bai's fingers suddenly grabbed the clothes on his chest. "Don't leave me in the future. Even if you leave, you can't be more than a meter away from me." Yu Ma Qian, but he had to leave eventually. Wei Wei Bai's voice carried a sob. "You're not allowed to leave." Such a straightforward and matter-of-fact request. She was obviously being unreasonable to the extreme. Yu Ma Qian wanted to refuse, but when he lowered his head, he saw her trembling fingers clutching his clothes so tightly that her fingertips turned white. When a person was afraid, it was like Wei Wei Bai. Even her legs were weak. She was practically hanging on to his body. Yu Ma Qian could only purse his lips and not say anything. He let her hang on to him like a pendant and didn't push her away. He even reflected on whether he was too much. It was indeed a little scary to throw someone who was afraid of ghosts into this room. Indeed, she could only be a little liar. No matter how good her talent was, she couldn't withstand her fear of ghosts. Yu Ma Qian sighed helplessly like an old man in his 70s or 80s. He said softly, "It's just a little brat. What's there to be afraid of?" He wanted to reprimand her, but when he thought of how scared she was, he couldn't bring himself to scold her. When he was learning the ghost-catching technique, there were also female disciples who learned it together with him. Every time he saw a male disciple being scolded for making a small mistake, while a female disciple was not reprimanded at all, he felt that men and women were unfair. Why did everyone do something wrong? What about the male disciples being punished? Now, he could roughly understand his master's feelings at that time. Looking at a delicate girl, he wanted to curse, but he couldn't bring himself to do so. If it was a man who was so cowardly, he wouldn't have scolded him. He probably would have slashed him with his peachwood sword. He beat them to death. It would save him the trouble of looking at her. The system couldn't help but say, "If you're really that scared, then don't catch ghosts. You'll just be electrocuted. It won't kill you. Just bear with it." Wei Wei Bai hugged Yu Ma Qian and sobbed. She scolded the system, "Why should I bear with it? Don't you want to farm favorability? And the mission of catching 100 ghosts, do you want to rely on me to complete it? I have to hug this golden thigh of ghost catching. A man like Yu Ma Qian." To put it bluntly, he was a bit of a male chauvinist and had a strong sense of responsibility. And he would take care of the weak. She was half afraid of ghosts and half shamelessly pretended to be pitiful. He just couldn't get rid of her. More importantly, she was afraid that she would have an excuse to not let him leave. She was electrocuted a meter away. In 3 years, she was electrocuted to the point where even her soul might have been burnt to a crisp. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. The is at https://m.sashu.com/. Chapter 1684. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai was so scared that she couldn't stop crying and trembling, Yu Ma Qian's brows furrowed tighter and tighter. He thought for a moment. It would be the same if he taught her next time. Forget it this time. He dragged her to this ghost site in the middle of the night to teach her. It was indeed inhumane. Yumotian reached out and patted her shoulder, comforting her softly. Okay, I'll take you away. After saying that, his eyes turned cold, and an extremely cold murderous intent appeared in his dark eyes. A violent golden light appeared on the peachwood sword, and he stabbed the tip of the sword into the ground. Blood emerged from the ground. Gurgling, emerged from under the floor. Wei Wei Bai was so scared that she jumped on him. She hugged his neck with both hands and wrapped her legs around his thighs. Yumotian's body stiffened. His round eyes almost didn't dare to move. He moved his lips. In this position, the softest part of her body was rubbing against his body. His cold and stiff body was like a corpse. Her body temperature warmed his dry and dead blood vessels. It made him feel that his skin was the temperature of a human. And the hot and fragrant feminine fragrance on her body was even more impossible for him to ignore. It was too inappropriate. This position was too intimate and too seductive. Blood kept flowing, and the floor of the room was soon full of blood. Under the blood, a strange figure twisted and stood up. Blood dripped down from his body. Black hair appeared from the blood, followed by a pair of resentful eyes. Why don't you love me? It was the female ghost that had just dissipated. The murderous intent in Yumotian's eyes was even more obvious. If it was an ordinary malicious ghost, her soul would have been scattered long ago. But she was reborn. This place was indeed strange. And it gave him a very familiar feeling. Yumotian observed his surroundings, and a familiar array flashed through his mind. No wonder it was familiar. The feng shui here was all man-made. And the person who set up this feng shui deliberately let humans live here. Just to provide food for this female ghost. Tonight, Wei Wei Bai was the female ghost's food. In this hotel, the female ghost could be reborn again and again. Because the terrain here was nourishing her. To nourish her, he had to nourish her body. Where was her body? The female ghost rushed over angrily, and the blood in the room surged in from all directions, turning into a terrifying weapon. Yumotian looked around. He was afraid that Wei Wei Bai would fall, so he held her buttocks with one hand. For a moment, he didn't think too much about how ambiguous this position was. Wei Wei Bai hugged his neck even more tightly. If not for the fact that Yumotian was already dead, he would have suffocated to death by now. However, Yumotian didn't feel that Wei Wei Bai was using too much strength. He pondered for a moment. When the blood rushed over, he pointed the peachwood sword in the air. Hundreds of yellow talismans appeared and flew into the air to form a circular formation. Then, the formation exploded and pierced through the blood and the female ghost's body. The female ghost let out another shrill scream before disappearing. The blood also fell back to the floor and disappeared. Yumotian saw that the room was still dark red. But the female ghost didn't appear. It seemed that she knew that she couldn't beat him. So she hid and planned to launch a sneak attack. Yumotian was very patient. He had the most time, so it wasn't like he couldn't afford to waste it. However, the scared little liar in his arms suddenly said with a trembling voice, "Brother are we out?" She was nestled in his arms and didn't dare to open her eyes, so she didn't see that they were still in this room. Yumotian, she asked. But he still hadn't dealt with this female ghost. Why did he feel a little embarrassed? Yumotian was a little embarrassed. He said softly, "We're out." After saying that, he raised his head. On his pale face, a twisted vortex appeared in the depths of his dark eyes. The black vortex was like a terrifying abyss. Violent ghost energy appeared. A cold wind suddenly blew around them. A fountain pen appeared on Yumotian's delicate and translucent fingertips. The fountain pen drew a door in the air. The door opened. Outside the cold gray door was the corridor of the hotel. It was the real corridor, not this female ghost space. He immediately walked out with Wei Wei Bai in his arms. The female ghost suddenly appeared behind him. She twisted her body and tried desperately to crawl out. Yu Maqian's eyes were cold and heartless. He kicked the door closed. For the first time, he didn't kill the ghost and chose to leave. Wei Wei Bai was still hugging him tightly, not daring to open her eyes. She said with a trembling voice, "Are we leaving?" They left. Yu Maqian was silent for a long time. Hugging her warm body, her young energy continuously entered his body. A warm flush appeared on his pale face. It was caused by her temperature. Then he lowered his head and said embarrassedly, "Not yet. Wait a while more." Wei Wei Bai hugged him even harder. Yu Maqian couldn't help but laugh. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 20. Chapter 1685. Wei Wei Bai heard the notification and immediately opened her eyes. She saw that they were already in the corridor. The lights in the corridor were unusually cold. However, compared to the blood-red room earlier, this place was much more normal. Yu Maqian saw that she opened her eyes and immediately put her down. He said softly, "You're out. It should be dawn soon. Let's pack up and go." He wanted to release the female ghost. However, the little celestial master seemed to be very scared. He was too lazy to go into the room to catch the ghost. In this world, there were so many ghosts that died unjustly. How could he catch them all? Catching ghosts was also a matter of fate. Wei Wei Bai was about to nod when the system said, "You can get a reward for catching ghosts." Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "There won't be any reward. I'm not going to catch ghosts." There was no punishment for this side mission. Other than the real-time electric shock, there was no extra reward. As long as she could survive these 3 years, it would be fine even if she didn't complete the side mission. The system said, "Catching a ghost will give you half an hour of time to leave Yu Maqian." Wei Wei Bai was speechless. She stiffened her neck and looked at the room they came out of. The door was tightly shut. It was obvious that it hadn't been opened for a long time. The door handle was covered in dust. Leaving Yu Maqian for half an hour was a good reward. She was sticking to Yu Maqian now, but it was impossible for Yu Maqian to stick to her for 3 years. They weren't conjoined twins. If Yu Maqian wanted to run away, she couldn't stop him. He was a ghost. He was gone in a flash. Once he left, it was only a matter of time before she turned into a roasted duck. Bai Weiwei hesitated. She was just about to open her mouth and ask the golden thigh for help. Before she could say anything, footsteps came from the corner of the corridor. Weiwei Bai immediately hid behind Yu Maqian. She cautiously poked her head out and asked, "A ghost?" Her dependent look made Yu Maqian's eyes soften. He had been alone for too long. He wasn't used to the sudden appearance of someone who was so reliant on him, but he indulged her even more. Yu Maqian felt that he was becoming more and more soft-hearted. He did not scare her. "It's a human." The little celestial master behind him immediately heaved a sigh of relief. He was no longer afraid. Yu Maqian curled his lips. Sometimes, humans were scarier than ghosts. But seeing that she was no longer afraid, he didn't say anything. Weiwei Bai saw a middle-aged woman carrying a red plastic bucket coming from the end of the corridor. It was the auntie who had given her the keys to the hotel, the owner of the hotel. The auntie was surprised to see her standing in the corridor. "Why are you here?" Indeed, it was scary to see someone standing in the corridor in the middle of the night. Weiwei Bai glanced at Yu Maqian. Then, she calmly stood beside him and said, I couldn't sleep, so I woke up and took a walk. The auntie carried the plastic bucket and muttered as she walked, young people nowadays are really strange. They don't sleep and walk around. Aren't they afraid? The last few words were too vague. Wei Wei Bai didn't hear it clearly and asked casually, not afraid of what? The auntie had already walked to her side. Suddenly, she pulled out a butcher's knife from the plastic bucket and shouted with a ferocious expression, Aren't you afraid of ghosts? With that, the butcher's knife viciously slashed at Wei Wei Bai's neck. Wei Wei Bai instinctively lifted her leg and kicked the auntie's chest. She was instinctively afraid when she met a ghost. When she met a human, her brain worked quickly. Even if the other party was holding a butcher's knife, her body instinctively did not hesitate. /save button. Chapter 1686. When the other party wanted to attack her, Wei Wei Bai would resist with all her might. She kicked the auntie to the wall and the butcher knife fell to the ground. If the auntie hadn't appeared strangely and met a ghost just now, she would have been dead already. Wei Wei Bai was vigilant. Anyone who wasn't vigilant would have their neck chopped off by the auntie. The auntie clutched her chest and spat out a mouthful of blood. Her trembling old fingers reached for the butcher knife next to her. Wei Wei Bai stepped on the knife and squatted down. She reached out to grab the auntie's hair and gave her a few slaps. She didn't even bother to listen to the other party. What was there to say to a murderer? It was just one word. After slapping the person, Wei Wei Bai picked up the butcher knife and placed it on the auntie's neck. What grudge do you have with me? Can't you talk nicely? Don't you know how to be civilized and polite when you touch me? Old people nowadays are all like you who don't respect their elders. What will happen to the astringent society? Wei Wei Bai sneered. Her eyes were unusually calm. She was a completely different person from when she met a ghost. Yu Ma Qian stood beside her. A strange fluctuation flashed through his dark eyes. He thought that she had always been timid. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows. Auntie, have I lied to you or harmed you in the past? I stayed in your hotel for one night and you gave me enough money. We shouldn't have met in the past. After all, I remember all the people I lied to. Yu Ma Qian sat cross-legged in the air. He supported his face with both hands and smiled faintly. She was indeed a little liar. She wasn't afraid of people at all. If she hadn't met a ghost, she would have been able to get by. The auntie said in a hoarse voice, What do you know? I want to save my daughter. I need to save her. Wei Wei Bai was speechless for a moment before asking, Who is your daughter? The auntie's eyes were cloudy and filled with hatred. My daughter was killed by that bastard. I opened this hotel and hired a feng shui master to set up a formation so that my daughter could be reborn. Did he eat too many brainless pills? Or was it because of the Chinibu virus? Wei Wei Bai couldn't understand, how are you going to let your daughter be reborn? The auntie said hysterically, that master said that as long as we can receive 9 guests and leave half of their souls behind when they leave the hotel, we can save my daughter. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but ask curiously, which customer am I? The auntie said, the 9th. I've been running this hotel for a year. You're finally here. You're the last one. Wei Wei Bai complained to the system, what kind of stupid hotel did you find for me? It's no different from a closed one. I've been running this hotel for so long and I only have 9 guests. The system replied, you only want the cheapest one, you don't have any other requests. Therefore, it chose the cheapest hotel. As for ghosts, it was not afraid of ghosts, vow. The auntie continued, those who leave their souls behind will leave in a daze like a fool. But you don't have any problems, so I can only make you stay because you're my daughter's hope. This kind of hope, Bai Wei Wei politely declined. Bai Weiwei sneered, "These words, you should say them to the police. For an illusory hope, how many people have fallen into despair? Look at you, you're still crying, aren't you?" The auntie's eyes were watery, and her face was twisted into a strange expression. Download the at https://m/sashu.com// to make it easier for you to read next time. You can click the save button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 1687. Even if I can't be resurrected successfully, I will leave this place and find that heartless man. I will kill you and form the 9 corpses in congregation array. Then I will be able to leave. The auntie's voice suddenly became strange. It was hoarse and sharp, young and old, as if it was formed by the overlapping of 2 people's voices. Weiwei Bai's fingers stiffened. She saw the auntie's eyes slowly fall from their sockets. Her tears turned into blood and flowed all over her face. Weiwei Bai, the auntie didn't care about the knife on her neck. "Give me your soul and stay here in my place. Hurry up and give it to me." The auntie reached out to grab her. Weiwei Bai was stunned. Before she could dodge, the knife was already taken away by the auntie. She almost jumped up and ran behind Yu Maqian. She hugged his waist tightly. "Yu Maqian, there's a ghost." Yu Maqian sighed helplessly. She was so capable just a moment ago. Why was she so scared now? The owner of this hotel had long been possessed by his daughter. The so-called leaving behind the soul was also a lie. To be exact, the people who stayed in this hotel were already dead. Because of the array, not everyone could enter the hotel. Only people with especially strong yin energy could enter by mistake. Once they entered, they couldn't leave. Weiwei Bai clearly had the body of a small son. How could she come to this hotel? Yu Maqian didn't think so much at first. Now that he saw the array, he found it familiar and realized that it was the 9 corpses in congregation array. It was the array of the Natural Tao sect. But this array could actually be used to make money. A strong murderous intent appeared in Yu Maqian's dark eyes. This was against the rules of the sect. The auntie slowly stood up. She stood up straight and her head strangely dropped to her chest. Her ugly old face started to laugh. "I have to find that heartless man. I have to find him and ask for an explanation." The corridor was slowly soaked with blood. The dark red color spread out from the locked door in the corridor. Suddenly, there was a loud crashing sound coming from the door. Pang, 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 it felt like something was about to fall out, and the lock was also in danger. Yu Maqian held the peachwood sword and casually swung it around. Then, he squatted down and carried Weiwei Bai on his back with one hand. Weiwei Bai exclaimed, "Yu Maqian." Yu Maqian frowned. "Impudent. Call me Big Brother." Weiwei Bai. "Big Brother." Yu Maqian, yes. How disrespectful was Yu Maqian? Yu Maqian was at least 100 years old. With a casual flick of his sword, he slammed the auntie into the wall at the end of the corridor. The auntie twisted her limbs, and the sound of bones breaking could be heard. She let out a shrill scream. The ghost in her body was also knocked out of the woman's body. The female ghost, wearing a blood-stained dress, crawled towards Yu Maqian at a strange speed. Why? Why does everyone want to stop me from finding him? Yu Maqian looked calm, like a doctor who was used to seeing wounds. His heart was as still as water, and his face was expressionless. He carried a small sun-like amalgamation of yang energy on his back. It was simply the best supply of yang energy. What was there to be afraid of? He was not afraid of ghosts. Yu Maqian threw the peachwood sword in his hand into the air. He drew with one hand, and countless yellow talismans appeared from the void. The yellow talismans burned and emitted a golden light. They were all pure yang energy. The light formed a golden net and pounced on the female ghost. The female ghost twitched and struggled desperately in the net. TXT. Chapter 1688. Yumochien glanced at the female ghost indifferently, then looked at the trembling door expressionlessly. He reached out and pulled the door open. Howling sounds came from inside the door, and several terrifying heads appeared. There were both men and women, and they were all young people. They crowded the door, trying to squeeze through the door. These were the 8 guests who had died in the hotel. Moreover, to form such a strange formation, the corpses must still be there. Wei Wei Bai was carried by Yumochien on his back, and she happened to see several ghost heads roaring and wanting to come out. She felt like she wanted to die. Such a huge ghost face, so ugly that it was super abstract. It was a ghost, and it was ugly. Fear and disdain were all present. Yumochien noticed that the little celestial master behind him was stiff, as if she was very scared. He comforted her, "Don't be afraid, it's just a few ghosts. It's nothing." After saying that, he stretched out his finger, and a faint golden light emitted from his fingertip. In the light, the young man's appearance was unusually cold and handsome. His black eyes were dyed with light, and there was an additional layer of mist. There was a sense of fragility like cherry blossoms, and also as cold as ice. There is no nostalgia in the world, and there is nothing to worry about. Path of 100 Ghosts, open. As soon as he finished speaking, a terrifying tremor came from the ground. The 9 corpses formation, which gathered Yin energy, was suddenly on the verge of collapse. Stinky gray gas seeped out from under the floor and the walls. It was resisting the tremor of the ground. Once this place cracked and collapsed, the formation would disappear. Yumochien carried Wei Wei Bai on his back, but he didn't land. He floated in the air, and his sleeves fluttered. The tremor of the ground became stronger and stronger, and in the end, the gas couldn't resist this terrifying force. The floor began to shatter, and the walls cracked. A huge black iron door drilled out from the ground. All the Yin energy in the hotel was sucked in by the iron door, and the door slowly opened. An endless, dark road appeared. There were red flowers on both sides of the road, burning brightly. They were spider lilies. Wei Wei Bai rested her chin on Yumochien's shoulder, opened her eyes, and couldn't help but ask, "What is this?" Her soft and warm breath came to Yumochien's cold ears. His ears were a little red, and her temperature made him feel a little like a human. His voice turned gentle. "It's nothing. It's just a ghost path. Once the ghost path is opened, any ghost that lingers in the human world must be on their way." Just as Yumochien finished, those ghosts were roaring and roaring, they were being torn by a huge force. They had no strength. Bai Weiwei suddenly wrapped her arms around his neck, her voice trembling, "You won't be taken away, will you?" Yumochien was stunned for a moment, he did not expect that she would be worried about this at the first moment. His black eyes curved slightly, bringing out a trace of a gentle smile. He was so strong that he could suppress 100 ghosts. All the ghosts in the room were taken away, and the ghost door slammed shut, disappearing into the air. The dark red color in the room disappeared, revealing the broken and dusty furnishings. The walls were all cracked. Under the cracked walls and broken floorboards, they were all corpses. Wei Wei Bai finally understood why Yumochien had stopped in midair with her on his back. Whether it was the ground or the walls, there were actually rotting corpses. If he stepped on them, the splashing of the corpses would definitely be pleasurable. Yumochien wasn't surprised at all. This formation was too sinister, causing the corpses to be in a half-rotten state. / button below to record this reading record. Chapter 1689. 8 corpses. No, 10 corpses. Including the female ghost and the owner of this hotel. This was a ghost hotel. Yu-Ma-Chin carried Wei Wei Bai to the door. The female ghost in the corridor had a ferocious expression as she rolled around in the golden net. Wei Wei Bai saw the ghost and shrank back. She buried her head in his back and said carefully, "Brother Yu, aren't you going to send this ghost away?" Yu-Ma-Chin said, "She has sinned deeply. There's no need to expiate her sins. Just destroy her on the spot." Then he put Wei Wei Bai down and stuffed the peachwood sword into her hand. "Kill her." Wei Wei Bai, Yu-Ma-Chin saw her dazed expression and finally couldn't help but pinch her face. He said loudly, "What are you scared of? She's just a little ghost, a bunch of obsessions. Hurry up and chop her to death." Wei Wei Bai, "I'm scared." Yu-Ma-Chin raised his eyebrows. "What's there to be scared of? This golden net is formed by your yang energy." Wei Wei Bai hesitated. "How about I give you some more yang energy and you kill her?" Yu-Ma-Chin was speechless. She was so scared. What could he say? Wei Wei Bai hugged the sword and saw that the ghost seemed to be crawling over again. She couldn't help but take a few steps back. Then she heard Yu-Ma-Chin sigh faintly. "I've never taught such a timid student." After saying this, Yu-Ma-Chin reached out and patted her head. Wei Wei Bai frowned and looked up. A cold lip was already pressed against her soft lips. She was stunned. Her eyelashes trembled and she glanced at Yu-Ma-Chin's face. Her breathing was very messy. She only felt that her lips were very cold, but she didn't dare to move. Yu-Ma-Chin closed his eyes and kissed her for a while before opening his eyes. He then turned his head and said coldly, "Borrow yang qi." Wei Wei Bai, she knew that with Yu-Ma-Chin's personality, he wouldn't take advantage of her. But this posture of borrowing yang qi was too ambiguous. Wei Wei Bai looked at his tense body with his back facing her. She couldn't help but ask, "Do you want to borrow some more?" Yu-Ma-Chin coughed lightly, then covered his mouth with his hand and said in a muffled voice, "No need." With that, Yu-Ma-Chin came to the front of the golden net. The female ghost seemed to know that her soul was about to dissipate. She immediately tore at her own face with both hands, leaving behind traces of blood and flesh. "I haven't found him yet. I haven't found the heartless man. I can't leave." "Yu-Ma-Chin, you don't have to leave. Just disappear." With that, he reached out and grabbed the net. With a tug, the female ghost in the net began to break. A mournful voice rang out. "Why are you stopping me? Why?" Yu-Ma-Chin's back was facing Wei Wei Bai. His enchanting eyes revealed a trace of extreme coldness. A strange smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "If you're dead, you should disappear. You shouldn't cling to this world. You clearly don't belong to this world, so you should be cut off and destroyed." His voice was so cold that it was terrifying. The strength of his fingers was also very cruel as he slowly tore at the net. The net turned into a sharp blade, cutting the female ghost's soul bit by bit. In the end, the female ghost roared resentfully and unwillingly disappeared into the quiet and shabby corridor. The golden net also disappeared. Wei Wei Bai hugged the peachwood sword and saw that he was half squatting on the ground, not moving. Wasn't the ghost killed? What was he still looking at? Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with a trace of vigilance, but when she thought that the target this time was very gentle, she bravely walked over. "Big brother you. / save button. Chapter 1690. Yu-Ma-Chin's body trembled and he suddenly raised his head. His black eyes were filled with ruthlessness and coldness. He looked at Wei Wei Bai as if he was looking at a stranger. Wei Wei Bai took 2 steps back from his gaze. There was something wrong with his gaze. Not to mention gentleness, it was simply morbid darkness. Wei Wei Bai was used to seeing targets who suddenly went crazy. When she saw Yu Ma Qian's changing expression, she was not surprised. She even asked calmly, "Tongzi, is Yu Ma Qian schizophrenic?" The system flipped through the information. No, he has been invaded by ghost energy. He had stayed in the ancient war zone and suppressed so many ghosts for so many years. How could he not be affected? Ghosts were obsessions, resentment, and all negative emotions tangled together. Yu Ma Qian was suppressing ghosts, wrestling with ghosts, and even killing ghosts. His pure soul was constantly eroded and polluted. A soul that was eroded by ghost energy would become paranoid and crazy. If he could control it, he could still maintain his original personality. But once it exploded, Yu Ma Qian's personality was more like a malicious ghost than any malicious ghost. Of course, if there was no stimulation, it would not be seen normally. Hearing this answer, Wei Wei Bai only felt that it was a scam. It was not easy to get a gentler system. And it was paranoid. The main system had a feud with her for 18 lifetimes. It just didn't want to let her have a good time. Yu Ma Qian slowly got up. His fingernails were all black, and his expression was not the same as usual. His black hair fell, and his eyes were darker. When he looked at Wei Wei Bai expressionlessly, there was a strange coldness and a trace of twisted greed. This expression made his face paler and more beautiful, but more like a ghost, lifeless. Wei Wei Bai was frightened by his pale face and was about to take a few more steps back. A huge force instantly clasped her shoulder and pressed her against the wall. The young man was tall, and his figure was very oppressive. He lowered his head and trapped her in his arms. An authentic Cabotin was completed. Wei Wei Bai's back hit the wall and she felt a dull pain. Her shoulder was cold from his fingers. Her words were a bit muffled. "Older brother Yu, what's wrong?" Could it be that he was about to go crazy after being invaded by the ghost Qi? When she raised her head to look at him, her eyes were filled with worry and clear doubt. Yu Ma Qian looked at her coldly for a while, and his eyes gradually softened. Just when Wei Wei Bai thought that he had regained his consciousness, her lips were sucked in by him. His cold lips touched her soft and warm lips. When they touched, both of them trembled. Yu Ma Qian's eyes flashed with a hint of struggle as he was engulfed by the ghostly desires. However, it was quickly covered by the black gas. He followed his heart's desire and lowered his head to kiss her lips. In the long and lonely darkness, a light suddenly appeared, even if it was just a warm touch of the other party's worry. He admitted that his heart had fallen a little. Loneliness was too frightening. It wasn't easy to find someone who was tied to him. He actually allowed the ghostly aura that was filled with obsession to escape from his body. And the ghost Qi also affected his actions. It made him impulsive and paranoid. This kiss was almost snatched. It had nothing to do with love, it was just a possessive impulse. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 25. Chapter 1691. Wei Wei Bai was stunned by the kiss. The cold kiss made her shiver. Yu Ma Qian was also stunned. His lips stayed close to hers for a while before he slowly moved away. Her lips were very red because he had bitten them. Yu Ma Qian looked away awkwardly. His mind that was controlled by the ghostly aura finally woke up. If he had a heartbeat, his heart would probably jump out of his chest. Wei Wei Bai touched her lips in a daze. She looked indescribably adorable. Wei Wei Bai said doubtfully, Yu Ma Qian immediately said, "Borrow the yang aura." Wei Wei Bai was stunned again. It was as if she had never seen such a shameless ghost. She didn't even know how to blink her eyes. She looked at Yumo-chan with an expression that said, "I've never seen such a shameless thing." Yumo-chan's face turned even paler. He suddenly snatched the peach wood sword back from her hand. "This is mine." Wei Bai, Yumo-chan held the peach wood sword and felt that his tone was a little fierce. He wanted to explain, but he didn't know how to. After saying so much, wasn't he bullying her? Could it be that his actions just now were purely to vent? He felt that if he said that, the little celestial master in front of him would probably cry. Yumo-chan tapped the peach wood sword with his finger. The sword disappeared into a spot of light. Then he said, "Let's go." After saying that, the shameless Yumo-chan turned and left. The empty and dilapidated corridor and the eerie and scary environment. There were also corpses all over the ground. He walked further and further away. Suddenly, Wei Bai's running voice came from behind. She rushed over and grabbed his clothes tightly. "Brother, you, don't leave me." Her voice was trembling badly. She was very scared. The corners of Yumo-chan's mouth curled up into a joyful smile. Of course, he immediately hid his evil thoughts. He even felt that he was too bad. It felt good to bully her like this. He immediately suppressed this kind of shameless thought. Had he been infected by the ghost chi? His thoughts were getting darker and darker. Yumo-chan reached back and grabbed her wrist. "I walk fast. Follow me closely." Wei Bai's teeth ached from the electric shock. She couldn't help but want to laugh at his face. After molesting her, he actually pretended that nothing had happened. Could his skin be any thicker? After walking out, Wei Bai found that the color of the hotel was different from the street outside. Yumo-chan looked at the entrance of the hotel and then at the normal street. He said, "This place has been occupied by the aura of death and yin energy for too long. It has already been left in the realm of the netherworld." In addition, he had just opened the gate of ghost. Let this hotel completely disappear from the world. Wei Bai couldn't help but look back at the hotel. It was indeed very gloomy. Cheap, no good, Wei felt that she had to work and earn money again. So, don't talk about her past as a rich young lady. She thought about working to earn money to support herself every day. She even bought a pack of sanitary pads that cost 5 yuan. How could she not be stingy and not be shabby? Just as Wei Bai lowered her head to calculate how much money she needed to earn, her eyes suddenly turned dark. It was Yumo-chan's cold hand that covered her eyes. "Repeat after me. There is a path between yin and yang, and there is a clear distinction between them. Crossing the line is an unintentional mistake. The mistake of crossing the line will be repaid in the future. Please forgive me." He didn't need to say this. The path he took was the path of the netherworld. But Wei Bai wasn't. She was a living person. If she was pulled back to the world of the living by him. Chapter 1692. In that case, the yin qi in the netherworld that she had been to would accumulate into her blessings. It would reduce her lifespan. She didn't understand, so he could only teach her. Although Wei Bai was puzzled, she still finished reading it. Yumo-chan nodded and said softly, "Very good, we're back." With that, he let go of her hand. The sound of people bustling on the streets could be heard. People were coming and going. It was the commercial street, and it was daytime. The gloomy hotel just now disappeared. Wei Bai was stunned for a moment before saying, "Oh right, where's my luggage?" Yumo-chan said, "It's soaked in corpse water, so it can't be used." Wei Bai expressed that she had finally lost everything. She didn't even have a pair of underwear. Her heart was numb from the pain. Then, she remembered what Yu Ma-qian wanted her to say just now. It seemed like she wanted to repay something. It was bad enough that she had nothing, but she still had to bear debts. Wei Wei Bai hurriedly asked, "What did you want me to say just now? What do I need to repay?" Yu Ma-qian said, "I'll help you repay it, but I need you to say it, so I can count my repayment to you." What could he repay? It was just hell money. He had a huge amount of money on him, and it was all hell money. It just happened to be useful. Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief, but still pretended to be polite and said, "Isn't this asking you to spend money?" When she said this, Yu Ma-qian immediately thought of his impulsive actions just now. "It's okay, just treat it as my repayment for kissing you." Wei Wei Bai, repayment my ass. You're a lonely dog, get lost. To conquer such a target, Wei Wei Bai often felt like she was in a situation where she would have a heart attack. The system said, "The side mission is 1% complete. You will be rewarded with half an hour of time away from Yu Ma-qian." After hearing this, Wei Wei Bai finally felt better. At least if Yu Ma-qian left, she would have half a buffer period to look for him. Let's not talk about the strategy. Yu Ma-qian was now her lightning rod. He didn't want to recall the feeling of being electrocuted at all. Wei Wei Bai took out her, intending to surf the internet to see if there were any job opportunities. The original owner's education wasn't good enough, so he didn't even complete the 9 years of service. Therefore, there was no other way but to work. As for catching ghosts to earn money, she suddenly felt that working was the best job in the world. Even if he was beaten to death, he wouldn't be able to catch the ghost. That feeling was even more terrifying than an electric shock. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was the most dazzling ethnic ringtone, which made Wei Wei Bai speechless. She had just picked up the phone when the man's loud voice suddenly roared. "Bai Wei Wei, we agreed on a blind date. Why haven't you come yet, aw? Third uncle will introduce you to a handsome young man. His family runs a mine, has 8 houses and 10 cars. Wei Wei Bai, blind date." Third great-uncle continued to roar, "He's a good match. I beat several matchmakers to get the chance to go on a blind date. Wei Wei Bai, do I need a blind date? I'm such a cute, beautiful, and perfect woman. No, a young girl. Do I need a blind date? I won't go even if I'm beaten to death." Third great-uncle said, "We're at Quanju Pavilion. We ordered a table full of good dishes, and we're slicing roast duck. Wei Wei Bai, I'll rush over immediately. Don't let that blind date run away." Who would pay the bill if he ran away? She was hungry, and her pockets were so empty that she couldn't even afford a burger. A table full of dishes. Roast duck. Not to mention a blind date, she would even go and fight a ghost. When Yu Ma-qian heard about the blind date, his dark eyes couldn't help but glance at her. Save button. Chapter 1693. So excited. So eager to go on a blind date. Wei Wei Bai grabbed Yu Ma-qian's hand and immediately rushed to Quanju Pavilion. Their location was coincidentally on the street where Quanju Pavilion was located. Otherwise, Wei Wei Bai wouldn't even have enough time to eat and she wouldn't even have the money for a ride. When they arrived at Quanju Pavilion, Yu Ma-qian was pulled in with an expressionless face. Before entering, he suddenly looked up at the entrance of Quanju Pavilion. 2 bronze Xie sculptures were actually placed here. Xie was a magical beast, but they actually put them in front of the restaurant. Before Yu Ma-qian could think further, Wei Wei Bai had already rushed through the hall. She arrived at the private room. Yu Ma-qian's attention was attracted by Wei Wei Bai's red face. She was filled with a sense of boiling blood, and even her fingers were burning with yang energy. Was she that excited? Yu Ma-qian's eyes darkened and the corners of his mouth pursed. Wei Wei Bai knocked on the door and even reached out to tidy up her clothes. After all, she was here to dine and dash. To eat more, she needed a good image to make people think that she was here for a proper blind date. And not to eat. In this day and age, to freeload, one needed to have the ability. As soon as she entered, she saw her third granduncle wearing a tang suit chatting with a young man in a suit. When the man saw Wei Wei Bai, his eyes lit up and he immediately stood up. "You must be Miss Wei Wei Bai. Please sit." Third granduncle glanced at his daughter and laughed loudly. "Wei Wei, this is the young talent I told you about, Wang Ba. He opened 3 factories at such a young age. He's a young man with a very bright future." With that, third granduncle turned his back to Wang Ba and winked at Wei Wei Bai. "This is a rich husband, hurry up and get him." Wei Wei Bai's eyes also turned cold. Her stomach was so full that she could eat the table. The dishes on the table were expensive and delicious. Bai Weiwei very naturally smiled lightly at Wang Ba, her eyebrows and eyes becoming beautiful. She was ambiguous and reserved, with a hint of seduction that made men fantasize. Wang Ba's face reddened, and he immediately sat down awkwardly. "Miss Bai, do you still need to order? I don't know what kind of dishes you like, so I'll get someone to serve all the expensive dishes. If you don't like them, I'll get them to make them now." Wei Wei Bai also sat down and said as if they were close friends, "Just call me Wei Wei. I'm not really here to eat. My third great uncle praised you to the skies, so I'm here to see you." As soon as he finished speaking, Wei Wei Bai calmly picked up her chopsticks. "You must be hungry after waiting for me for so long. Let's eat first." She passed a piece of roast duck to Wang Ba, then added 3 pieces of roast duck to her bowl and calmly stuffed them into her mouth. It was delicious. Wang Ba was praised so much that he couldn't tell north from north. He quickly said, "I'm not hungry, I'm not hungry." Wei Wei Bai had a look of understanding. "Don't be reserved, I like generous and unpretentious men the most. If you're hungry, just eat." With that said, it would be pretentious if he didn't say it. Wang Ba immediately picked up his chopsticks. "That's right, I also hate those pretentious women the most. They can clearly eat a pig, but they deliberately pretend to have a small stomach." Wei Wei Bai smiled. "Don't worry, I'm not that kind of woman. It's best if we don't pretend." Wang Ba suddenly felt that such a pure and unpretentious girl. It was simply his dream come true. Just as Wang Ba was being fooled. Wei Wei Bai had already finished half of the roast duck, 4 dishes, and 2 bowls of soup. She was very calm and elegant, and wanted to sweep the table of dishes into her stomach. Chapter 1694. If he didn't eat, he wouldn't be able to eat anymore. He didn't even know where his dinner was tonight. Wang Ba stuffed a few mouthfuls of food into his mouth and looked up at Wei Wei Bai in a daze. When she lowered her head, her eyelashes were long and thick, and her eyes were clear and lovely. How cute! Wang Ba looked at her absent-mindedly. He felt his heart pounding, and as it beat, he felt a little cold. Was the temperature of the air conditioner too low? Wang Ba didn't care, but he suddenly felt something under the table and slowly touched his thigh. His face turned red. This is, he looked at Wei Wei Bai in surprise and happiness. He didn't expect such a bold and open girl like her. If it was another girl, he would definitely not like it, but if it was her, it didn't seem unacceptable. Suddenly, Wang Ba felt that something was wrong. The hand touching his thigh was right. However, Wei Wei Bai was eating fish with chopsticks in one hand and eating lotus seed soup with a spoon in the other. Her actions were so unpretentious and super cute. Both hands were on the table, so the hand touching his thigh was. Wang Ba immediately looked at his third granduncle. However, he saw that his third granduncle had both hands on the table and was drinking leisurely with a happy look on his face. Wang Ba, his face instantly paled. There was someone under the table. Wang Ba immediately reached out and grabbed the hand touching his thigh. He didn't expect a thief to enter such a high-class restaurant. He wanted to complain. However, after grabbing that hand, he felt that something was wrong. Because it was very cold, so cold that he felt like he was grabbing ice. Wang Ba didn't think about that for a moment. He frowned and lifted a corner of the tablecloth, intending to catch the thief. He wasn't usually so brave, but he remembered that Wei Wei Bai was here. He felt that if he showed his brave side, Wei Wei Bai would definitely think that he was awesome. Then, the next date would definitely go smoothly. When he saw Wei Wei Bai, he already knew what their child's name would be. Wang Ba looked down. There was no one under the table. He felt strange and thought that it was an illusion. However, just as he was about to look up, he saw a pale hand suddenly appear on his thigh. A pale hand wasn't scary. However, it appeared out of thin air. There was nothing, just a hand. That was very scary. Wang Ba was stunned. Then, he looked terrified. He suddenly screamed and jumped up from the chair. Ghost! After he shouted, he immediately rushed to the table. Third Ziz's face. Bai Weiwei's mouth was full of food. She puffed up her cheeks and looked sluggish. Two. When her third great-uncle saw that she was going to pay the bill, he reacted faster than her and immediately ran away. She wouldn't be taken to the police station by the restaurant, right? Wei Wei Bai asked in a low voice, Brother Yu, why did he run away? Is there a ghost? Why didn't she see it? Yu Ma Qian was very calm. He probably didn't want to pay the bill. After all, there are many poor people in front of others. Wei Wei Bai thought about it and agreed. She was one of them. She put on a bitter face and continued eating. How was she going to run away later? Yu Ma Qian supported his face with one hand and looked at her with a smile. Under the table, a yellow talisman slowly fell to the ground. A hand was drawn on the yellow talisman. The yellow talisman slowly burned and disappeared under the table silently. He felt that he was getting worse and worse. But when he saw Wei Wei Bai's disappointed face, Yu Ma Qian's guilt disappeared. Ordinary people were not suitable for her. Ordinary and gentle men were not good enough for her. So he didn't seem to have done anything wrong. Yu Ma Qian calmly exonerated himself. Suddenly, he heard Wei Wei Bai mumbling, How are we going to pay the bill? Yu Ma Qian couldn't help but laugh. I'll pay. Chapter 1695. There was an imperceptible sense of doting in his tone. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly while holding her chopsticks. Then, she blushed and continued eating without saying anything. Whether or not she was going to pay the bill, the most important thing was to eat her fill. Yu Ma Qian watched her eat attentively. He watched as the blush on her cheeks slowly climbed to the tip of her ears. She looked indescribably delicate and cute. When they finally finished eating, Wei Wei Bai took out a tissue to wipe her mouth. Then, she coughed softly. Then, you pay the bill. Yu Ma Qian nodded and then calmly took out a black card from his pocket. It was an authentic black card, the kind of ordinary black paper with nothing on it. It was not the kind of black card that could swipe an unlimited amount of money as you imagined. He handed the black card to Wei Wei Bai. Pick it up and swipe it. Wei Wei Bai, what could be swiped? The machine would not recognize it. And even if it could be swiped, would it be hell money? Wei Wei Bai felt that she was going to be detained for eating and dashing. She looked at the table of expensive dishes. She silently cursed that bastard. She did not see a ghost even though she had the yin-yang eyes. He did see it. Did it look like a ghost when he saw the bill? Wei Wei Bai took the piece of paper and lamented that her reaction was not quick enough. Otherwise, she would have seen a ghost or something. Believe it or not, it could run faster than them. When the waiter came in, Wei Wei Bai looked at him guiltily and said, "Swipe the card." Swipe the card to pay the bill. Password. Yu Ma Qian leaned over and whispered a number in her ear. He even emphasized, "The card contains all my assets. You have to take good care of it. Take good care of my foot." Could it be that his assets were all kinds of paper products? Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled even more. She felt that she was about to be tied up and hung up by the waiter. The waiter took out the card machine and asked Wei Wei Bai to swipe the card and enter the password. Wei Wei Bai tried to swipe the card over. To think that it could really be done. After swiping the card, Wei Wei Bai signed her name in a daze. Then, she took the card and followed Yu Ma Qian out of the private room. She looked at Yu Ma Qian, who was floating beside her. "Do you have money in your card?" "Yu Ma Qian, there's a lot of paper money." "Wei Wei Bai, isn't this cheating?" When he thought about how his boss had counted a pile of hell notes, he would definitely be traumatized. Yu Ma Qian finally couldn't help but laugh. He had seen Wei Wei Bai's cowardly look just now. He had been holding it in all this time. "Trust me, the owner of this shop will be very grateful to you. Other than hell coins, the only things in my card are luck and lifespan." During his years of killing ghosts and suppressing ghosts, he would obtain the blessing of dispelling resentment. Their lifespan mostly came from ghosts and monsters. Some ghosts died before reaching the end of their lifespan due to various reasons. After he killed the ghost, he would be able to deposit that life into his account. These were all considered wealth. Hell notes were used in the netherworld, but lifespan and luck could be used in the world of the living. The luck that he had just given could allow this shop to prosper for 3 months. The food that Wei Wei Bai ate was nothing. Hearing his words, Wei Wei Bai felt that other people had to pay with money, but he had to pay with his life and luck. Wei Wei Bai lamented that she was still inexperienced. She handed the black piece of paper in her hand to Yu Ma Qian. "I'm returning it to you." After all, this was his entire fortune. She couldn't be greedy. Even if she wanted to be greedy, she didn't know how to use it. It wasn't like she could casually swipe for luck and lifespan. If she swiped out hell notes, she would be dumbfounded. Yu Ma Qian crossed his arms and glanced at her from the corner of his eyes. "I'll leave it to you for safekeeping. / to facilitate your next reading, you can click on." Chapter 1696. He looked at her body. He kissed her again. He did something that he shouldn't have done. He felt that he should be responsible for her. If there were no accidents, he should protect her in this life. Who asked him to do such immoral things to her? Of course, Yu Ma Qian didn't say this to Wei Wei Bai. He thought about it silently. After all, if Wei Wei Bai really met a man in the future, the kind that she liked very, very much, wouldn't he be an obstacle to her? Yu Ma Qian had a possessive feeling in his heart, but when he was rational, this possessive feeling was hidden in his heart. Moreover, their feelings hadn't reached that level yet. He felt that he could still tolerate it. If Wei Wei Bai really met a man that she liked in the future, he would still give her his blessings. He should be able to. Yu Ma Qian wasn't sure. Wei Wei Bai still gave in. "No, it's so precious. I won't feel at ease if I take it." If it was real money, she wouldn't refuse. Yu Ma Qian sighed and reached out to take the card. However, when Wei Wei Bai let go of her hand, he immediately patted the card and slapped it into her palm. There was a mark on her palm. It was left by his fingernails. He glanced at it and didn't say anything. Wei Bai felt her palm turn cold. Then, she looked down and saw a black pattern on her palm. Yu Ma Qian, the hell money inside can give you more protection when you meet ghosts. Wei Bai was confused. What protection? Yu Ma Qian, spend money to buy your life. There are ghost servants and ghost gates in the netherworld. These can all be controlled with money. If you meet a malicious ghost in the future, immediately throw money to open the ghost gate or summon a ghost servant. You can settle it with a large amount of hell money. She really didn't have the ability to catch ghosts. She could only use money to save her life. Otherwise, with her pair of yin-yang eyes, she would definitely be haunted by ghosts many times in the future. If it wasn't for her pure yang physique. Ever since he was young, he had encountered countless ghosts. However, the pure yang constitution wasn't omnipotent. Normal ghosts would take a detour when they saw her. But if it was a particularly powerful evil ghost, then the pure yang constitution would be a warning light bulb. Wei Bai had nowhere to run. Yu Ma Qian looked at the confused Wei Bai with a melancholy expression. How could she improve her ghost-catching skills? Being afraid of ghosts was really not easy to handle. He couldn't possibly catch a few ghosts every day and place them at her bedside to scare her. Wei Bai felt a chill run down her spine. Why did she feel that Yu Ma Qian's gaze was so strange? Could it be that he was reluctant to part with the money and was just pretending to be polite with her? Wei Bai immediately declined. This is your money. It's better for you to keep it. Yu Ma Qian tilted his head and looked straight at her with his dark eyes. Suddenly, he said, this money isn't important. Your life is more important. You are the only hope to take me out of that place. You are also the only guarantee for me to wander around the world. This money should be considered as your protection fee for protecting me. More importantly, it was to protect her life. Wei Bai couldn't help but smile. How can I accept this? As she spoke, she held his hand. It was like giving out red packets during the new year and politely saying no, 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 as she reached out and put the red packet into her pocket. Yu Ma Qian felt that her fake politeness was quite interesting. He couldn't help but smile. Wei Bai felt that since she had accepted the money, she had to do something. She very enthusiastically reached out and hugged his shoulders because he was tall and floating. Slash. Chapter 1697. Therefore, she had to tiptoe to reach it. She said to him, don't leave me in the future. My yang energy can protect you. The reason why Yu Ma Qian was able to leave that place was because of her yang qi. With yang energy, he looked like a human. Wandering in the human world would not damage his soul, nor would he attract the arrest of the ghost messengers of the netherworld or the punishment of the heavenly Tao. Yu Ma Qian nodded. Okay. He was not afraid of the damage and the arrest of the ghost messengers. He was afraid of the punishment of the heavenly Tao. Yu Ma Qian was about to walk out of the door when his expression suddenly changed. He reached out and pulled Wei Bai behind him. He quickly raised his palm, and a golden 8 trigrams array pattern appeared in his palm. It was like a beautiful shield. A blue electric shock came from the door with a force that could destroy dry weeds and rotten wood, directly toward Yu Ma Qian. The golden 8 trigrams array blocked the lightning. The gold and blue exploded. Yu Ma Qian came back to his senses and directly carried Wei Bai up. He tiptoed and rushed up the stairs with incomparable speed. A monster covered in lightning ran from the door with a rumbling sound. Its entire body was covered in dragon scales, covered in green fine hair, and a black horn on its head. It rumbled and roared as it chased after Yu Ma Qian. It was the copper sculpture of the Siege at the door. Yu Maqian's face darkened. These two copper sculptures of the Siege should be antiques. In the past, in front of the Yamen, it had absorbed too much spirit energy. That was why it could sense his arrival. He was a malicious spirit that could only survive by deceiving the world of the living. To the Siege, who could distinguish between right and wrong, he was a monster that could not be tolerated by the world and had to be erased. Yu Maqian did not care when facing malicious spirits. Only when facing such things with the aura of the heavenly Tao would he be serious. A few lightning strikes attacked Yu Maqian from all directions. Yu Maqian's expression froze. He extended his finger and quickly drew countless yellow talismans in the air. The yellow talisman emitted golden rays of light that connected into a huge net, blocking the lightning. Thunder and lightning crackled in the air like fireworks. Wei Wei Bai was pressed against Yu Maqian's chest. She couldn't help but ask the system, "What the hell is this?" The system said, "Siege, it specializes in catching liars." If it wasn't for the fact that the system had a high level and protected Wei Wei Bai, it would have been impossible for her to escape. This Siege was attacking Wei Wei Bai. This was because Wei Wei Bai's existence was even more unusual than Yu Maqian's. This was even more intolerable to Siege. Suddenly, another Siege rushed out of the door. The two Siege beasts glowing with blue lightning used a terrifying power to destroy the Yu Maqian spell formation. The sharp horn was aimed at Yu Maqian's body. Yu Maqian retracted his feet and stepped on the Siege's horn, flying to the ceiling. His whip was swept by the lightning, and his black hair scattered. He rushed to the end of the corridor and put Wei Wei Bai down. He held her head with one hand and whispered in her ear, "Wait for me here." After he finished speaking, a fountain pen appeared in his palm. The fountain pen drew a circle on the ground, surrounding Wei Wei Bai. Then he turned his back to Wei Wei Bai. His feet were floating, his long hair flew, and his black pupils became blood red. Traces of red lines spread from the corners of his eyes, strange and cold. The fountain pen drew two long swords in the air. The red tassels were as red as blood. He picked up the swords with both hands, his eyes cold and full of killing intent. The divine object that contained the aura of the heavenly Tao's punishment was the most terrifying weapon to restrain ghosts. Phone, https://m, Sashu. Calm. Chapter 1698. He was suppressed by various rules in the world of the living. He couldn't launch a large-scale attack, so his hands were tied. The Siege rushed over, and a bolt of lightning struck him fiercely. Yu Maqian's long sword was faster than the lightning and blocked all the lightning. In the blue electric shock, the young man's back was always facing Wei Wei Bai. He was proud and straight, and his black hair was flying wildly. And on his face, the red lines had spread to his eyes. And he was looking more and more like a malicious spirit. This kind of appearance was very ugly. This was also the reason why Yu Maqian didn't look back. Wei Wei Bai stayed obediently in the circle and would never do anything to court death. The taste of electric shock was not good. The system couldn't help but remind, "Oh, it's almost 1 meter." Wei Wei Bai was very calm. "Hee, I have half an hour to leave Yu Maqian. What am I afraid of?" The system thought about it and agreed. Then, the system and the host were heartless, and not playful things. Just like that, they squatted in the circle and chatted. Yu Maqian's body proportion is good. This sword is good to see. The ability of the male lead to killing ghosts. When he is serious, he can fight hundreds of malicious spirits alone, and not a single ghost can get close to his body. It sounds very safe. When I see him, I'm not afraid of ghosts. Yu Chen was simply a weapon to suppress malicious spirits. If a ghost saw him, it would probably take a 300-mile detour. Yu Chen was fighting with the Xie Ji while paying attention to the movement behind him. He was afraid that Wei Bai would leave the circle and leave his protection circle. Fortunately, he didn't hear her courting death footsteps. He calmly floated in the air, and with a terrifying force on his sword, he stabbed into the neck of a Xie Ji. The Xie Ji was just a spiritual aura of punishment. This sword strike had caused a Xie Ji to disappear. Although it was tricky and restrained, it was not difficult to solve it if he was given time. When he saw the other Xie Ji almost explode and rush toward him, he was shocked. Yu Qian's face turned cold, and a strange smile appeared on his face. Black ghost chi appeared in his red eyes. It looked even more terrifying. A strong killing intent appeared in his heart, and the thought of killing controlled his movements. Yu Qian's calm and rational mind wanted to suppress the invasion of the ghost energy. For so many years, he had fought with ghosts and ghostly energy. He was already used to multitasking. But this time, for some reason, the ghost chi actually gained the upper hand. Yu Qian felt a sharp pain in his head, and a thought appeared in his mind. Kill everything. Human beings, evil spirits, and the heavenly Tao. Everything that was in his way had to disappear. When did his obsession become so serious? Yu Qian firmly suppressed this killing intent. But when he was distracted, Xie Ji had already rushed over. He dodged backwards. He was still attacked by the electric shock. His entire body crashed into the wall, and Xie Ji also crashed fiercely. Yu Qian's eyes turned cold. His red eyes were as red as blood, terrifying to the extreme. His expression became ferocious. Xie Ji's attack made the ghost chi occupy his thoughts, making him want to start a massacre. Just as he raised his hand and was about to destroy everything, a body bumped into his arms, and then a clear and sweet voice sounded. Swipe the card, open the way with the underworld coins. The sound of the ground shattering came. The ghost gate appeared, and countless underworld coins flew. When the ghost gate opened, Wei Bai did not care about anything else. She pulled Yu Qian and ran towards the ghost gate. Xie Ji crashed into the ghost gate and was bounced back. The eerie ghost gate was filled with spider lilies on both sides. Wei Bai saw that Yu Qian was about to die, so she could not help but rush out to save him. After all, he was still a target. She could chat with the system and watch the show. At the critical moment, she could not do nothing. Moreover, a beauty saving a bear was the best way to gain favorability. Wei Bai praised herself for being quick-witted. Then, she raised her head and planned to confess to him that she could give up everything to protect him. However, when she looked up, she saw Yu Qian's cold face. His eyes had turned red, and there was no white in them. His black hair was draped over his body, and his face was covered in red lines, like blood vessels. He tilted his head strangely, and his coldness was exceptionally terrifying. Then, he slowly revealed a strange but murderous smile. I seem to like you quite a bit. Wei Bai, she felt that something was wrong. Then, in the next second, a cold hand grabbed her neck and lifted her up. Yu Qian's pair of dull, but ferocious and cold-blood eyes revealed a strange light. He said gently, I like you so much that I want to kill you. Wei Bai, Yu Qian was completely controlled by the ghostly aura. // save button below to record this reading. Chapter 1699. You can search Transmigration System, Male God, come to Sashu. Calm in Baidu to find the. He wanted to explain, but he was afraid that she would look at him with a frightened expression. He allowed her to misunderstand that he was possessed by a ghost. Yu Ma-chin quietly stood in front of her. When he lowered his head, his black hair fell on her shoulders. In the end, he only reached out his finger and gently stroked her short hair. In the future, I'll accompany you no matter what you want to do. His eyes were covered as his lips slightly curved. He softly said words that had nothing to do with love, but were sincere words. After all, she was the one who brought him out of that lonely place, and he had seen her body. His sense of responsibility didn't allow him to escape. But in the next second, his lips were covered by a hand. A warm fingertip scalded his cold lips. Then Wei Wei Bai's voice sounded, "All right, I'm just joking with you. Look at how scared you are and how you want to take responsibility for me. It's not like you'll grow a needle's eye, so it's fine if you see it. Society is more open now, so you don't need to be so old-fashioned." Her words paused before she softly said, "You don't need to always follow me. You can do whatever you want, I don't want to imprison you." Yu Ma-chin was silent for a moment. His mind was filled with her gentle tone. She smiled, "After all, we can be considered friends." Yu Ma-chin's heart trembled, but he was a bit moved. This feeling turned into another emotion that made him tremble. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 30. His closed eyes were a bit bitter as he softly said, "All right, friend." He was a wandering ghost. Other than being her spirit behind her and accompanying her, he couldn't give her anything else. If she didn't have a pure yang constitution, his existence would have already become a leech that sucked away her life force. If a person stayed with a ghost for too long, it would take their life. Not to mention that they could be together. If they really were together, he would kill her. Yu Ma-chin fumbled for her hand. Then with his back facing her, he gently said in a hoarse voice, "Put on your clothes, let's go." Wei Wei Bai seemed to be laughing in a low voice. It was as if he was mocking his cowardice. Yu Ma-chin said calmly, "Oh right, there are a lot of ghosts in this place. If we don't leave now, all the hanged ghosts, drowned ghosts, and hungry ghosts will come." Wei Wei Bai's smiling face froze. The surroundings were dark and gloomy. She had let herself loose so much that she had actually forgotten that they were on the ghost dao. This place was the path of the netherworld for ghosts. Wei Wei Bai shivered and quickly put on her clothes. She needed to be blindfolded even more than Yu Ma-chin. A baby who was afraid of ghosts couldn't stand being scared. When she saw ghosts, even nightmares had a prototype. In the future, when he was alone in the middle of the night, even if there was no ghost, he would be able to imagine the image of a ghost. Wei Wei Bai felt that it was too scary. Hearing the sound of Wei Wei Bai quickly putting on her clothes, Yu Ma-chin couldn't help but smile. He was really scared of ghosts. He was obviously bold, but he was so afraid of these little things. After Wei Wei Bai finished putting on her clothes, she took his robe and gently tapped his back muscles with her finger. His body stiffened and he heard her say, "Put on your clothes." Why did the two of them have such an ambiguous conversation? Yu Ma-chin lowered his head and seemed a little shy. Then he reached out and pulled the cloth off his eyes. His half-closed black eyes were like the endless night, but there was a hint of softness. Then he took the clothes in her hands. The clothes turned into dark blue spots of light and covered his body. A complete set of clothes appeared on his body once again. Yu Ma-chin saw that his hair was loose, but he wasn't in the mood to braid it, so he just let it go. Chapter 1700. Then, he held Wei Wei Bai's hand and walked forward. When his back was facing her, he did not dare to let go of her hand. He was afraid that he would lose her. In the quiet and dark ghost path, only the red spider lilies on both sides were bright. Wei Wei Bai said, "These flowers are beautiful. Yu Mo-chien had never paid attention to these flowers. After all, red spider lilies might bloom in places with dense yin energy. To him, they were no different from the wild flowers and weeds by the roadside. When Wei Wei Bai said that, he remembered that girls liked flowers and weeds. He stopped in his tracks and suddenly bent down. His sharp nails cut open the branches of the red spider lilies, and a handful of red flowers appeared in his hand. Then, he handed the flowers to Wei Wei Bai. "If you like them, I'll pick them for you." Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly for 3 seconds. She could say that he was unromantic. But now, he was very familiar with flirting. Seeing Wei Wei Bai staring at him blankly, Yu Mo-chien couldn't help but remind her, "You're human. Don't come into contact with these things. In the future, I'll give you some flowers from the human world. You can look at these red spider lilies. I'll help you hold them." It was because of her special physique. Otherwise, with him floating behind her, she would always encounter ghosts and enter a place with dense yin energy. Ordinary people would have long fallen seriously ill. It was even easier for a weak body to die. Wei Wei Bai looked at the large bunch of red spider lilies in front of her. She suddenly couldn't help but reveal a bright smile. This smile was different from her usual carefree smile. There was a gentle glow between her eyebrows. The red of the red spider lilies was overshadowed by her. Wei Wei Bai said, "In the world of the living, sending flowers like this means that you're confessing." Yu Mo-chien paused. Then, he took the flowers back and threw them by the roadside. "I don't know. Then I'd better throw them away." Wei Wei Bai, lonely souls and wild ghosts. Wild ghosts can still be saved. Lonely souls are the important thing. You deserve to be a single dog in life and a lonely ghost in death. Is there anyone who flirts like you? It was like a straight man killing a girl on a live stream. Wei Wei Bai expressed that she did not want to talk to you, forever alone, strange ghost. Yu Mo-chien brought Wei Wei Bai back to the mortal realm. He casually swiped a large sum of money from Wei Wei Bai's imprint and asked Wei Wei Bai to recite the words of repayment. Only then did he throw out the money. As soon as the money fell to the ground, a bunch of little ghosts lay on the ground, desperately snatching the money. That terrifying scene made Wei Wei Bai hug Yu Mo-chien's arm tightly. She wished she could become a pendant on Yu Mo-chien's waist. This world was full of ghosts. To her, it was simply a terrifying deathly experience. Yu Mo-chien couldn't help but reach out and pat her head. "Don't be afraid. Ghosts aren't scary." He was used to seeing ghosts. He didn't find these guys scary at all. After all, he had killed so many ghosts that he was not afraid of them. His body was still suppressing countless vengeful souls from ancient wars. Because they were vengeful souls from ancient times, their strength was not something these little ghosts could compare to. If all those vengeful souls from ancient times rushed out, then whether it was the mortal realm or the netherworld, it would be a huge disaster. The place his body was suppressing was a veritable hell. The yin energy there would constantly attract a bunch of ghosts passing by. This would cause more ghosts to appear in that place. The senior in red, who had almost scared Bai Wei Wei to death at the beginning, was also attracted like this, and was unable to leave for eternity. No matter how many times Yu Mo-chien told her not to be afraid, Wei Wei Bai expressed that she was still afraid. This was not something that could be comforted by words. Fear came from the heart and could not be suppressed. Wei Wei Bai became even more clingy to Yu Mo-chien. She realized that she could meet ghosts everywhere in this plane. Is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1701. If not for Yu Mo-chien, she would probably be scared to death in her sleep. Not long after returning to the world of the living, Wei Wei Bai dragged Yu Ma Qian to a hotel when a call came. Yu Ma Qian could pay the bill with the good fortune in his card, so she chose to stay in 3- or 4-star hotels. When she picked up the call, it was still third great uncle. Third great uncle said loudly, "Wei Wei, your blind date was scared away by a ghost, but he still can't forget about you, so he asked you out again." Wei Wei Bai, after eating a free meal, he actually wanted to eat another meal. Was being thick-skinned a necessary advantage in this society? According to Wei Wei Bai's information, this third great uncle was a good person, but he was a little unreliable. However, he still took care of the younger generation. The only problem was that, like psoriasis, once he set his mind on something, he would do it very enthusiastically. For example, he would arrange a blind date for her. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment, then suddenly said, "I have a boyfriend, third great uncle, so you don't have to introduce me to a blind date." Especially when it was a blind date who ate a free meal. Boyfriend. Yu Ma Qian looked at her from the corner of his eyes, his black eyes dark. Wei Wei Bai did not pay attention to Yu Ma Qian, but spared no effort to say, "My boyfriend is very rich, not to mention 10 houses, even if it's 100 houses, he can buy me one. He even put all his money in my bank account, and he's very good to me. We're going to get married soon, so you don't have to introduce me to a blind date." Third great uncle exclaimed, "Really? Why didn't you say so earlier, and you even agreed to a blind date?" Wei Wei Bai, "Didn't I go to dinner because I wanted to reject you? I wanted to make things clear in person, but you all ran away." She still couldn't forget that they had dined and dashed. Third great uncle said happily, "That's a good thing. Girl, where is your boyfriend from? He's so rich, he must be on the rich list. You're going to live a good life for the rest of your life." Wei Wei Bai immediately spared no effort in praising him. Of course, he's handsome, tall, and good at fighting. Furthermore, he's someone from our circle. He's not a liar, but someone who can really catch ghosts. He's so rich because he caught ghosts. He's perfect. He's gentle and devoted. No man in this world can compare to him. Except for the fact that it was a ghost. Yu Ma Qian was indeed good at everything. Yu Ma Qian heard her say boyfriend at first. He didn't know why his mood was so heavy, and his eyes were much colder. But the more he listened, the lower his head became. He was not stupid. Wei Wei Bai was obviously talking about him. Wei Wei Bai spoke in high spirits, as if he was really that good. Yu Ma Qian couldn't help but reach out and touch his face. Was he really that good-looking? After Wei Wei Bai finished praising him, she said, "That's it then. Goodbye, third great uncle." Third great uncle quickly said, "Okay, I know you're busy dating. Oh right, remember to come to the family banquet next week. Bring your boyfriend too. Old Master is going to announce his successor." Although there were many scammers in the Imperial Dao sect. But not everyone was like that. The successor would definitely be the best of the new generation. Wei Wei Bai was not interested. "Okay, I got it." After hanging up the phone, she heaved a sigh of relief and muttered to herself, "Where can I find a boyfriend?" Yu Ma Qian looked at her deeply and suddenly reached out to tug at her hair. Wei Wei Bai immediately covered her head and glared at him. "What are you doing?" Yu Ma Qian whispered, "I'll go back with you." Wei Wei Bai muttered, "You're not my boyfriend. I was just lying to third great uncle." Yu Ma Qian chuckled, "Pretend for a while. Otherwise, you'll have to go on blind dates every day." Wei Wei Bai trembled. Once was enough for her to eat and dash. She didn't need to do it 100 times. Then, she looked at him suspiciously. "How are you going? No one can see you." Yu Ma Qian supported his chin with one hand and floated in midair. He thought for a while and then took out a fountain pen and slowly drew his appearance in the air. Then, under Wei Wei Bai's shocked gaze, a body appeared beside her. Yu Maqian leaned over. His body was warm, and his heartbeat and blood vessels were all there. Wei Wei Bai looked at him in surprise. Yu Maqian moved his arms and legs. He wasn't used to it. Then, he thought for a while and drew a flashy red Ferrari. One look and one could tell that it was expensive. It was the red of a nouveau riche. Wei Wei Bai looked at him as if she was looking at Mo Liang. Yu Maqian leaned against the car and smiled. How is it? Is it handsome enough to buy you 100 houses? Wei Wei Bai, she said that he didn't know how to flirt. He was especially good at flirting now. This man was even more fickle than a vixen. Save button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 1702. Wei Wei Bai glanced at the red Ferrari and this handsome and rich nouveau riche. Then she pointed at his hair. It's too long. His long hair was simply non-mainstream. Yu Maqian reached out and touched his hair. But I'm used to it. His hair had always been this long and had not changed his hairstyle for hundreds of years. Wei Wei Bai reached out and touched the back of his hand. It was really hot. Anyone who saw Yu Maqian would think that he was human. Ghosts nowadays were so awesome. Yu Maqian looked down at her hand and then couldn't help but hold it. Their fingers intertwined and they felt the same temperature. He couldn't help but smile. Although this body was drawn and couldn't last long, it gave him an illusion. He was further away from her. Wei Wei Bai reached out and pulled his hair. Yu Maqian's head tilted and fell off. His head fell off. Yu Maqian immediately held his head and put it back. With a crack, it was as good as new. Wei Wei Bai, Yu Maqian, this is a body formed by ink. The neck is very fragile. It will break if you pull it. Wei Wei Bai stiffened for a long time before stammering, you can use better ink. Yu Maqian's eyes curved into crescents as he smiled. All right. Use better ink next time. Wei Wei Bai, do it a few more times. I'm going to be scared to death. Yu Maqian opened the car door. I'll send you to the hotel. After all, the fortune in his bank account would rot there if he didn't use it. It was rare to have Wei Wei Bai use it for him, so he felt very happy. Wei Wei Bai looked at the flashy red Ferrari. It had been a long time since she sat in a famous car. She happily got into the car. This soft feeling was a little strange, but it was still a car after all. Yu Maqian stood outside the car and looked at Wei Wei Bai innocently. Wei Wei Bai was touching her seatbelt. Why aren't you driving? Yu Maqian scratched his face in embarrassment and said, I don't know how to drive. He did know how to ride a horse. Old-fashioned cars were also driven. But this. He really didn't know how to do it. Wei Wei Bai, all right, old antique, don't make things difficult for him. Wei Wei Bai rolled up her sleeves. I'll do it. You come up. Yu Maqian's smile immediately brightened. He immediately got into the car. Wei Wei Bai sat in the driver's seat and touched the steering wheel. It had been a long time since she had driven such an expensive car. She touched it a few times to satisfy her craving. Yu Maqian sat down. Because of the glossy mask on his face, his large, black eyes were actually different from those of ordinary people. It was even clearer and brighter. Wei Wei Bai drove the car out. He looked at her with a smile. It was as if he had drawn a car for her to play with. If she was happy, he would also be happy. As Wei Wei Bai drove, it started to rain. At first, she didn't think much of it. After all, the car wasn't convertible. but she suddenly felt the rain on her face and her hair hit by the rain. Wei Wei Bai was at a loss for a moment. Strange, was the rain splashing in through the window. She looked up and saw that the Ferrari was gradually melting in the rain. Wei Wei Bai, silence. More silence. Then she realized that the steering wheel in her hand was gone. The brakes were gone, and the accelerator was gone. She sat in the air, drenched by the rain as she sped forward. More than half of the car had already melted, and 2 of the wheels were gone. Wei Wei Bai felt that she had been so close to death in a car accident. Furthermore, it would definitely become a headless case after she died. ////// Chapter 1703. Because other people would have a car when they got into a car accident, but she had nothing. Yu Ma Qian blinked and said, "I forgot, the ink will disappear when it gets wet." Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled. "Why didn't you say so earlier? At least choose a good day to go out." Yu Ma Qian smiled. "I saw that you were happy, so I didn't remind you." With that, he hugged her and leaped out. The smile on the car turned into black ink in the rain, then it turned into an empty color and disappeared completely. Yu Ma Qian hugged Wei Wei Bai and jumped onto the road beside them. Wei Wei Bai hugged Yu Ma Qian's neck tightly and sighed in relief. "Fortunately, you're here," Yu Ma Qian said. "It's okay, I won't let anything happen to you." His words were a little vague, and his voice was strange. Wei Wei Bai looked up strangely, then she saw Yu Ma Qian's face was blurred, like an ink painting that was immersed in water, then the ink began to melt. His facial features were quiet in the rain, slowly flowing down. What a scary scene. Wei Wei Bai felt that she had never seen such a scary ghost. Her head tilted, and she fainted. Yes, the Bai Weiwei, who was accustomed to countless big scenes, who wanted to live or die, who was unreasonable, who wanted to hang herself and roared without fail. It was the first time that it was scared to death by a target. At first, the system was eating snacks and watching cartoons happily. After all, the host was so capable that she didn't need it anymore. It was happy and let the host do her own work without worry. As for it, it should take a rest. Ever since it sold furniture, cutlery, and all kinds of unsuitable decorations. It had a lot of money and could eat its fill. It could also find its own entertainment. Then, before it could finish the potato chips in its mouth, it saw the host fainting from fear. It had to record such a rare scene immediately. Even the host who caused trouble would have a day like this. He had to record it quickly. Yu Ma Qian hugged Wei Wei Bai. His face was blurry as he tilted his head obediently. Then, he put down Wei Wei Bai because his body had also melted away. Their arms and legs were broken, and their bodies were torn apart. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare. However, Yu Ma Qian calmly emerged from the mass of ink. Then, he used his spirit body to hug Wei Wei Bai, and the golden light formed a protective circle. After drying her clothes, he opened the gate of ghost and walked in, disappearing into the rain. The ghost path was a shortcut. It was not a good thing for humans to enter it by mistake. He planned to use the underworld coins to open the way, and with his protection, it would not be a problem to take Wei Wei Bai away. However, it was rare for him to show off in front of a girl. He had actually failed. It was rare for Yu Ma Qian to be shy. After leaving the gate of ghost, he went to the hotel and drew a new body for himself. Then, he went to check in. The auntie who checked in for him stared at him suspiciously. After all, he was carrying an unconscious girl to check in. Was it drugged? Was it drugged? Did he need to call the police? Yu Ma Qian did not care about other people's gazes. He calmly adjusted his position so that Wei Wei Bai could sleep more comfortably. After completing the formalities, Yu Maqian walked away with Bai Weiwei in his arms. However, the more the auntie thought about it, the more she felt that the handsome guy just now had a wretched look on his face. Look at his eyes, they were abnormally bright. Although he was handsome, he was definitely not a decent person. What kind of decent man would have such long hair? And the girl in his arms was so cute. It was obvious that she was not asleep, but unconscious. To download the full text. Chapter 1704. The auntie picked up the phone and dialed the number. Hello, is this the police? I suspect that someone drugged X in our hotel. The address is XXXX. The hotel had a large single bed. The bed was soft. He carefully placed her on the bed and saw that her face was pale. She was scared out of her wits. Yu Maqian touched his face, took out a fountain pen, and re-inked himself. As long as there was no water, there shouldn't be any problems. Yu Maqian finished drawing. He stared at his body carefully, afraid that something would not look good. Although it was drawn based on his appearance, he couldn't help but decorate it beautifully. Yu Maqian didn't know why his mentality was so childish. But he couldn't control himself, so he couldn't control himself. He was a very casual person. If he wanted to do something, he would do it. He realized that his nose was a little flat. His nose was higher. He immediately reached out and wiped it. Then, he raised his pen and was about to draw. Weiwei Bai gasped for breath. She opened her eyes as if she had just woken up from a nightmare. Then, she saw Yu Maqian floating. In front of him was a body that looked like him. The body that looked exactly like him raised its head stiffly. Hearing Weiwei Bai wake up, Yu Maqian turned his head. The body also turned its head. You're awake. I ordered dinner for you. I was afraid that you would be hungry. Weiwei Bai stared at the body. The nose on her face was gone. Only a pair of black eyes were looking at her with a strange luster. Seeing Weiwei Bai staring at the body he drew, Yu Maqian thought that she was not satisfied. He immediately wiped his face with his sleeve. His facial features were wiped away bit by bit. I'll draw it better. Weiwei Bai was silent. She turned her body, then quietly pulled the blanket and wrapped herself up. So scary. She suddenly realized that when Yu Maqian scared people, she couldn't take it. Tongzi, I'm scared. As expected, only the system was her bottom line. No matter how good Yu Maqian was as a boyfriend, he couldn't withstand his scary facial features. The system said, "Don't be scared, I'm here." Then, it continued to film its host's scared face. Such a scared host, it had to film it. When it was in a bad mood in the future, it would be happy to watch videos of its host. The plastic Tongzi was still acting as usual. Yu Maqian finished drawing the body before attaching himself to it. He found it strange to see Bai Weiwei locked in the quilt. Weiwei. He reached out his hand and gently touched her hair. And Weiwei Bai was still Tongzi was Tongzi. Tongzi was Tongzi, Tongzi was Tongzi Tongzi Tongzi. Tongzi 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 was Tongzi Tongzi Tongzi, Tongzi, and Tongzi. And Tongzi Tongzi. If it wasn't for that terrifying scene just now, she might think he was handsome. Now, whenever he saw him, he would be traumatized. Weiwei Bai didn't even dare to touch him. She was afraid that if she touched him, a piece of his skin would fall off. She poked her head out. Her pink skin was a little red, her hair was fluffy and messy, and her eyes were misty. She looked indescribably cute and harmless. Yu Maqian's fingers paused, and his face suddenly turned red. His body was almost the same as a human's, and he had all the physiological reactions unique to humans. But he didn't think of this at the moment, thinking that he was still pale and expressionless. She couldn't tell that he was actually shy. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 35. Wei Wei Bai looked at his red face, and the fear in her heart dissipated a little. The main reason was that her favorability had increased. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. /crossover system, Adonis, come here. Read at https://www.sashu.com//crossover system, Adonis, come here. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. Read at https://sashu.com crossover system, Adonis, come here. Chapter 1705. Yu Maqian reached out and pretended that nothing had happened. He blushed and said, "Get up and eat. You're different from me. You need to eat on time." Wei Wei Bai nodded and climbed out of bed. Yu Maqian accidentally glanced at the room and saw that his face was red in the mirror next to him. He was stunned and quickly got up. "I'll go see if dinner is here." Then he walked to the door and slowly exhaled. It was a completely human reaction. He reached out and touched his face. He thought about what happened 100 years ago. Other than cultivating and studying, he had never looked at other girls. At that time, there were very few female students. He came and went in a hurry, so he didn't meet many. The atmosphere in the family was even more of a power struggle. He was annoyed just by looking at it. As a result, when he met Wei Wei Bai for the first time in 100 years, he was a little flustered and felt a little moved. The impulsiveness of a young boy was really not suitable for his age. Yu Maqian looked at his fingers. In the end, it was still fake. He was a ghost. Humans and ghosts were different. He couldn't implicate her. Yu Maqian tried hard to suppress the throbbing of his first awakening of love. However, he felt a little sad in his heart. This caused his expression to be cold and sharp to hide his discomfort. Yu Maqian suddenly looked up. His expression was murderous. The waiter who delivered dinner, Yu Maqian then remembered that he was waiting for dinner. He said, "Leave it here. I'll push it in." The waiter looked at him suspiciously. There was even disdain in his eyes. Then he put the things down and hurried away. When he ran downstairs, he saw the hotel manager and immediately said, "I can't enter the room. That man is guarding the door. One look and I can tell that he's not a good person. He's very scary. The girl who was carried in by him is probably dead." The manager's expression changed. "Don't disturb him first. Turn on the surveillance camera. The police are coming. We can't be impulsive. Otherwise, the criminal will be ruthless to the girl." When Yu Maqian saw the waiter running away quickly, he thought that his cold expression had scared the waiter, so he didn't think too much about it. He reached out to push the dining cart, and just as he opened the door, his eyes suddenly turned cold, and his finger drew a line in the air. A golden ray of light with countless runes and patterns appeared. A complex formation appeared. A dark red, ominous soul slammed into him. It was a ghost. Dense rays of light appeared from the formation, entangling the ominous red aura. The red ghost on the formation roared as if it wanted to escape. But they were like mosquitoes on a spider's web. No matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't leave. It roared, "I have no enmity with you. I'm just passing by, and you want to kill me." A speck of golden light appeared on Yu Maqian's fingertips as he said softly, "You're disturbing the people by wandering around this hotel." He knew how scared Wei Wei Bai was of ghosts. Even if this ghost had no intention of harming them, it would still scare her. And as long as it was a ghost that stayed in the human world, it definitely wouldn't be a good thing. The red ghost was enraged. Seeing that its soul was about to be destroyed, its soul twisted and actually self-destructed. The red ghost used a suicidal force to attack Yumochian directly. Yumochian's eyes flashed with a trace of cold disdain. He spread out his 5 fingers, and his fingers transformed into the shape of a flower. The red ghost completely disappeared. Yumochian coldly looked at the disappearing ghost. Killing ghosts was as natural as breathing for humans to him. Some red gas filled the air and floated into the room. This gas was just some of the resentment of the dead ghost. It would disappear very quickly, and its damage to people was very limited. Yumochian didn't think too much about it, because these things didn't affect him in the slightest. Under the influence of 100 years of despair and resentment, and the insanity of countless ghosts, he could still remain clear-headed. His self-control was so strong that it was beyond anyone's imagination. Yumochian pushed the dinner into the room and closed the door. He looked up and was about to call for dinner, but he saw that Weiwei-bai's face was very red. Her whole body was trembling, and she was biting the blanket. Some red gas surrounded her. Yumochian's expression changed. He actually forgot that humans could be affected. He rushed over and reached out to hold Weiwei-bai's face. He stared into her eyes and found that there was a faint layer of red mist in her eyes. It was the remnant resentment of that ghost. Yumochian's eyes were dark and heavy. He asked softly, "What is your resentment?" It was possible to directly disperse the resentment, but it would hurt her. Yumochian wanted to use a gentler method to ease her discomfort. Weiwei-bai looked at him in confusion. Suddenly, she revealed a charming smile and suddenly reached out to pull him onto the bed. Yumochian looked at her with a puzzled expression, but saw that she was lying on his chest with a seductive look in her eyes. "Baby, do you want to be happy? I'll let you have a good dream." Yumochian, he finally knew what that red ghost was. It was a lecher in dreams. It specialized in seducing women who stayed at the hotel. Chapter 1706. Weiwei-bai held his hand and told him not to be impulsive. Then the two of them reported to the police station. They received a lot of verbal education and were even given a bag of condoms before they were chased out. The two of them were still confused when they left the door. The police uncle told them that they were too young and had to be careful. If it wasn't for the fact that they were both adults, the uncle would probably have to look for their parents. Yumochian threw the drawn ID card into the puddle as soon as he left the door, and it instantly disappeared. He held the condom and lowered his head. His bangs covered his eyes, and he didn't dare to look at Weiwei-bai. Weiwei-bai couldn't help but comfort him. "Nothing happened, right? Besides, I was possessed and impulsively treated you like this. Don't mind." Yumochian stuttered. "No, I don't mind. Weiwei-bai, it's good that you don't mind." "I don't mind either." "Yumochian, you can actually mind more." But he didn't dare to say it. For a moment, he felt that his identity as a ghost wasn't good enough for her and that he shouldn't be tempted. For a moment, he felt that they had all done this. If she didn't marry him, her reputation would definitely be bad. What would she do in the future? She wouldn't be able to get married. If he was still human, no matter how poor, tired, or difficult, he would survive. He would be responsible for her. But he was a ghost, and 100-year-old malicious ghost. His body was still suppressing countless ancient vengeful spirits. If he got too close to someone and spent too much time with them, that person would be plagued with bad luck and would never be able to turn over a new leaf. If they spent too much time together, they would die directly. After death, their souls wouldn't be able to rest in peace and might dissipate. It was Weiwei-bai's pure young body that was holding on. Otherwise, she might have been killed by him. Yumo-chan thought of this and immediately reached out to touch her face. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly, but she didn't slap his hand away. Yumo-chan heaved a sigh of relief. The temperature was still very normal. Her pure yang constitution was really very good. She had been with him for so long and had even gone to the Gate of Ghost twice, but she hadn't come into contact with the slightest bit of yin energy. If she always had this kind of physique, then the things that would accompany her for the rest of her life might really come true. After guarding her for 100 years, he safely sent her to the Bridge of Helplessness and watched her reincarnate into a good body. Perhaps, this was the best and most perfect ending for both of them. Wei Wei Bai saw his serious and strange eyes and couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong?" This plane was too easy, and the target of this strategy was too gentle. His attitude was even more upright than hers, and there was no need to mention his values. He was simply a super outstanding young man who could fly. Even the ghost that she was most afraid of was dealt with by him with a wave of his hand. Therefore, in this plane, Wei Wei Bai felt that she was here for a vacation. Didn't he see that the useless system was even more incompetent than her? In this plane, there were very few opportunities for it to open its mouth. Don't think that she didn't hear the sound of it watching cartoons and eating snacks every day. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai didn't pay much attention to Yumo-chan's state. She could gain favorability just by staying by his side. Who would work hard? After looking at Yumo-chan, she felt that the targets of those previous strategies were demons and ghosts. There wasn't a single one that wasn't crazy. Wei Wei Bai's eyes couldn't help but soften. Yumo-chan's voice also became low and gentle. No. Oh right, how do I deal with this? He couldn't help but blush again. His skin was thin to begin with, and in his ghost state, it was hard to see through without the color of blood. Once he entered a human-like body, it was very easy for others to see through his weakness of being shy. Chapter 1707. Wei Wei Bai, I threw it away. Yumo-chan, you threw it away. Wei Wei Bai, if you think it's a waste, we can use it. Yumo-chan, then he silently threw the condom into the trash can and didn't dare to say anything else. He was afraid that Wei Wei Bai would really make him use it. He didn't know how to use it and had never used it before. Also, he didn't know who to use it with. Yumo-chan secretly glanced at Wei Wei Bai, but before she noticed, he turned his head again. The night was dark and the street lights were shining brightly. There were people walking in groups of 2s and 3s. There were also many couples on dates. As they walked, Yumo-chan's brain twitched and he reached out to hold her hand. Then he lowered his head and said, "Don't get separated." Wei Wei Bai held back her laughter. Okay. The two of them held hands and walked slowly under the moonlight. They were like two happy snails. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 45. When they reached the hotel, because the journey was too long, Yumo-chan carried Wei Wei Bai when she was sleepy. When they reached the hotel, she leaned softly on his shoulder and rubbed her face against his long hair. He turned to look at her and found that she was in deep sleep. Yumo-chan smiled and slowly walked into the hotel. When they returned to the room, he put her on the bed and covered her with a blanket. His body also slowly disappeared. His spirit body floated by the bed and he tried to reach out his hand. Then he slowly held her fingers. She flinched, as if she was cold. Yumo-chan's pitch-black eyes, which were devoid of light, had a tinge of gentleness. He sighed in relief, afraid that he wouldn't be able to touch her. Then he sat by her bed all night, staring at her like this. For the next few days, Wei Wei Bai and Yumo-chan were like two big salted fish. Eating and waiting for death, eating, drinking, and playing. He didn't do anything serious. When Yu Maqin occasionally caught a few ghosts, Wei Wei Bai would look at him with admiration. Then, he couldn't help but catch a few more ghosts. Wei Wei Bai said that every time she caught a ghost, she could leave Yu Maqin for half an hour. She indicated that she could be away from him for more than 5 hours, after deducting the time he was gone. The growth of the side quests was gratifying. A week later, Wei Wei Bai received another urgent call from her third granduncle. Everyone from the main and branch families will be here today. Don't be late. Wei Wei Bai was more willing to eat, drink, and catch ghosts with Yu Maqin. He didn't want to get involved in the Imperial Dao sect's affairs at all. But they still had to go through the motions. After looking at the information, they realized that they were just going to eat, drink, and find out who the successor was. Then, they would go home to find their mothers. Wei Wei Bai glanced at Yu Maqin. I can go back by myself. After all, Yu Maqin was still a ghost. No matter how much the Imperial Dao sect cheated, there were still some capable people. Yu Maqin was silent for a moment before saying, "Am I so unpresentable?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him and quickly said, "No, I just think that you are too handsome. I'm afraid that you will be snatched away by others." Yu Maqin's face turned pale, and his dark eyes curved. "I'm not afraid. No one can snatch you away from me." It was only a little more than 40 favorability points. Plus, he was pedantic and wanted to be responsible for her. It was even better than a favorability point of 80. Wei Wei Bai tried her best to reject him. "I still don't." Yu Maqin reached out his cold hand and helped her smooth her short hair. "Don't worry. The juniors of the Imperial Dao sect are not very capable. They can't see through my disguise." Wei Wei Bai saw that he was full of confidence and could only say, "Then can you not draw a car or something like that suddenly disappear?" It wasn't that she didn't believe him. She didn't believe in his Ferrari and his face. After all, in this day and age, it wasn't impossible for some young ladies to suddenly rush over and splash a cup of tea on a handsome man like the president. If it was at that time, Yu Maqin's face would be blushed. It was okay to scare others to death, but it would worsen the shadow in her heart. Yu Maqin reached out his finger and thought for a moment. "This is not easy. Why don't you beg me? I will draw a car and a man for you that won't be blushed." Wei Wei Bai tiptoed and kissed him heavily on the lips. Then, she said calmly, "Draw it." Yu Maqin was stunned for a few minutes before he replied, "Okay." A fountain pen appeared in his hand. Just as he was about to draw, Bai Wei Wei hesitated and said, "Can you make him more handsome?" Yu Maqin, ? Bai Wei Wei, watch TV. The current trend is that the appearance of the little fresh meat is so good-looking, so youthful, so manic, so full of vitality. I'll pick out this year's top 10 most handsome little fresh meat photos for you to draw according to Yu Maqin. The. Chapter 1708. Yu Maqin felt that his self-control was still very good. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to interact with so many ghosts for so long without going crazy. But for the first time, he felt the ghost aura in his body surging up. A wave of anxious emotions pulled at him, making his mood terrible. He glanced at those little fresh meats. No matter how he looked at them, they were ugly. Wei Wei Bai pointed at the best-looking one and said to him, "Look at this beautiful short hair, good-looking eyes, and nose." Yu Maqin felt that her aesthetic standards might have been affected by something. He sulked for a long time before saying, "They're not good-looking." Wei Wei Bai pointed at another one. "What about this one?" Yu Maqin's tone became unpleasant. "Ugly, androgynous." Wei Wei Bai frowned. "What about this one?" Yu Maqin sat cross-legged in mid-air. Suddenly, he turned around and began to draw his body. He didn't speak to Wei Wei Bai. He was angry. He didn't even know what he was angry about. He must have felt that her aesthetic standards were not good, and what kind of men did she choose? All of them were uglier than ghosts. How could men look so tender, so fair, and so feminine? Yu Maqian drew his own body. As he drew, he suddenly felt that he was also very tender, very fair, and very feminine. He died as a young man, so he was especially young and inexperienced. All the signs of a man's maturity didn't have time to appear before they were fixed in age. Even though he was tall, he didn't look like an adult man who was extremely muscular. Instead, he was more slender and thin. Not to mention her long hair that reached her waist. As Yu Maqian drew, he really wanted to make himself look more mature. But he didn't look like himself. When he thought of Wei Wei by looking at his face, he thought of another man. He held a breath of anger in his empty chest. In the end, he wiped his long hair and drew short hair like those little fresh meats. This way, he didn't look so feminine. Yu Maqian was like an angry frog. He wanted to change it, but he was unwilling to give up. Suddenly, a pair of hands reached out from behind his shoulders, and a warm body pressed against his back. Wei Wei Bai purposely chose to breathe on the tip of his ear. It's so beautifully drawn. Where did this handsome guy come from? I'll take this one. Yu Maqian almost fell to the ground. His eyes were almost crooked. He pondered for a while before saying, "All right." After he finished drawing, Yu Maqian's eyes turned cold. He put his index finger and ring finger together, and a cold green light appeared. He entered the body that was drawn. This was ghost qi, and it could strengthen the effect of the ink. It would not melt in the face of fire and water. Yu Maqian noticed that Wei Wei Bai was still clinging on to him. He lowered his eyes and didn't say anything, letting her hold on to him. In his empty chest, those grievances gradually disappeared. Instead, a soft sweetness surged up. Bit by bit, it seeped into his bones, so greasy that his teeth were about to fall. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 50. A human and a ghost, still in a strange and warm way of getting along. On the day of the announcement of the successor of the Imperial Path sect, in addition to family members, some people in the circle also came. The sect leader of the Natural Path sect also came. Because this time, in addition to announcing the successor of the Imperial Path sect, the treasure of the Imperial Path sect, the Ghost 8 diagrams, was also taken out for people to see. The Imperial Path sect and the Natural Path sect were in this line of work. They were sects that had been around for hundreds of years and hadn't dispersed until now. Even though the Imperial Path sect was a bit despicable, they were also a bunch of swindlers. But there were still some things left by their ancestors. Of course, they couldn't be compared with the Natural Path sect. Quick transmigration system, male god, come here. Chapter 1709. Third uncle was chatting with a distant cousin of Wei Wei Bai. The blind date from last time, the one who is very rich, really wants to contact Wei Wei again, but Wei Wei might not like him. The cousin sneered. Although she is a direct descendant of the sect, both her parents are dead. She has been very poor since she was young. It is not easy for her to meet a rich man. She might be playing hard to get. When the cousin was in school, she did not get along well with Wei Wei Bai. Although Wei Wei Bai was not good at anything, her appearance was still very good. Back then, the Prince Charming that the cousin liked had a crush on Wei Wei Bai. Although it was in the past, there was still a grudge between them. As a result, the cousin especially disliked Wei Wei Bai. She wished that she would always be in dire straits so that she could be a foil to her beauty. Third uncle frowned. Is she your cousin? How can she speak like that? Also, that blind date is not reliable. Who runs away in the middle of a meal? Even if it is a ghost, it is too unstable. After all, they were in this line of work. The number of times they encountered ghosts was definitely more than ordinary people. The cousin rolled her eyes. What era is it? Where did ghosts come from? Isn't our Imperial Path sect relying on those superstitious uncles and aunties to pay for it? She was not a core figure and had no talent in catching ghosts. She grew up like an ordinary person. Her parents were in the business. Although she was a distant relative of the Imperial Path sect, she was very far away from these things. If it was not a major event, these people would not gather together. The mediocre younger generation didn't believe in ghosts at all. Was the game not fun? Was the live broadcast not good? Or was the novel not interesting? Why did she believe it? Third uncle saw her like this and did not say much. After all, such a person was the happiest. But education was still necessary. Don't talk nonsense today. The elders are here. The cousin rolled her eyes. Is that blind date really that rich? Third uncle, his family is not bad. He has a lot of houses. The cousin, why don't you introduce him to me? Third great uncle said, your cousin is older than you. The cousin said, what's the big deal about being in university for 3 months? Why should I introduce her to a good guy? With her condition, she's better off marrying a migrant worker. Third great uncle, the cousin continued, these days, people are realistic. With Bai Weiwei's qualifications, it's impossible for a good man to fancy her. You know, they're of equal social status. She's poor and white, so there won't be any conflicts. Third great uncle, his worldview is very crooked. Cousin, if a rich man really likes her, he'll have to be old and ugly. Third great uncle saw a gorgeous Ferrari appear in the distance. It was obvious that it had been built with money. An open car, and the driver was Bai Weiwei. And the man sitting next to her was so handsome that it made people's legs go soft. Third great uncle couldn't help but say, Weiwei is still very good. Her boyfriend is probably handsome and rich. Her cousin couldn't stop talking for a moment. If she can meet such a man, look at the flowers in the flower pot. I'll broadcast myself swallowing the flower pot. A car drove past in front of them. It was a bright car, smooth and beautiful. Her cousin's eyes were sparkling. Then she saw the car enter a group of black cars. A man got out of the passenger seat. Under his long and thick eyelashes, his black eyes were pure and bright. His fair and cold face had a hint of youthfulness. His thin lips were pursed seriously, and there was a hint of noble elegance. Slash. Chapter 1710. He was wearing a black and silver tang suit, which accentuated his slender and perfect figure. His cousin and third granduncle were speechless. They had seen handsome men, but they had never seen such a handsome man. Yu Maqian walked quickly. When Weiwei Bai unbuckled her seatbelt, he had already walked to the car door and opened it. He held out his hand like a gentleman, put it on the back of his hand, and let her out of the car. Weiwei Bai was wearing an elegant plum-colored cheongsam, which matched Yu Maqian's tang suit very well. This was chosen by Yu Maqian. After all, this was an official family meeting. Everyone was wearing formal clothes. Therefore, it was not awkward to wear a cheongsam. What was awkward was that the person wearing it was too outstanding. Are you used to wearing high heels? Yu Maqian held her hand and kept an eye on her feet, worried that she would fall in her high heels. Weiwei Bai smiled. You have to believe in a woman's balance. I definitely won't fall. She had worn high heels for many years. How could she fall? When Yumachian carefully held her hand and walked through the door, he did not notice the people beside him at all. Wei Wei Bai saw it and did not think much of it. She smiled at third granduncle and the woman beside him. She smiled politely and did not have any other emotions. When the two of them walked through the door, third granduncle and cousin heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. When the two of them appeared at the same time, they did not dare to make a sound. They were shocked. They were even more afraid that if they made a sound, they would disturb this beautiful scene. The cousin belatedly realized was that Bai Weiwei. Third granduncle nodded silently. Then, he raised his phone and turned on the video camera function. I heard that you're going to live stream yourself swallowing a vase. I don't have enough material on TikTok recently. You can swallow it. I'm filming. Cousin, after entering the door, Yumachian looked up and scanned his surroundings. The interior decoration of the Hall of Emperor's Gate was still something. The array formation also had the ability to filter out evil beings and ghosts. However, it was still difficult for them to detect his arrival. His body was filled with Wei Wei Bai's yang energy. Even the Yang Realm's heavenly Tao could be deceived by him. Let's not talk about the Imperial Path sect's array formation. After all, even if the Imperial Path sect had some real items, it would depend on the abilities of the younger generation. Look at Bai Weiwei, such a good talent, ruined like this. Yumachian didn't know how to feel about the Imperial Path sect. Actually, he still wanted to teach Wei Wei Bai. But when he thought of how scared she was of ghosts, he couldn't bear to drag her into a dangerous place. That kind of place was usually especially terrifying. He was afraid that she would have nightmares. Yumachian glanced at Wei Wei Bai and realized that she was mindlessly scanning the menu. It seemed like she was about to start eating. He thought helplessly, this seems to work too. After all, being talented didn't mean that one had to catch ghosts. Catching ghosts was tiring. It was also a blessing to have some life-saving items and live a happy and peaceful life. Thinking of this, Yumachian didn't feel conflicted anymore. Many people came today. There were outsiders, insiders, relatives, friends, boyfriends, and pets. It was lively and lively. They ate and drank. Everyone was happy. When it was about time, the sect leader of the Imperial Path sect, Bai Bai, appeared in a loose tang suit. He chuckled and was very amiable. After all, one didn't rely on a sweet mouth to cheat others. What else could a sweet smile rely on? Thank you for taking the time to come here. Please forgive us for not being a good host. Today, we are going to announce our successor. Please be a witness. // Chapter 1711. Bai Bai smiled without any arrogance. Wei Wei Bai picked up a plate and touched the desserts on it. She said to Yumachian, "This is my great uncle, but we have never met before." The original owner's information was complete. But it was very dull. The Imperial Path sect was very scattered, and they didn't live together. Everyone was busy scamming money, so they didn't pay attention to the younger generation. Although they were direct descendants, they couldn't learn much. They all relied on the inheritance of their parents, so it was up to them to learn what they wanted. On the other hand, the Imperial Path sect was rich and poor. Although Wei Wei Bai was a direct descendant, she didn't inherit much. The successor was definitely from the original owner's father's older brother. She was just here today to go through the motions. As expected, she talked a lot. In the end, Bai Bai announced loudly, "My grandson Bai Mu is talented, hardworking, intelligent, and kind. I solemnly announce that he will be the successor of the Imperial Path sect." Wei Wei Bai immediately put down the plate and clapped with the others. She could finally leave. This boring successor announcement. Yu Moqian saw her excited face and knew that she was bored. Her personality was similar to his. He also hated this kind of boring. He found something similar to her. Thinking about this, Yu Moqian felt like he was going crazy. Why was his mind filled with Wei Wei Bai every day? Shouldn't he be thinking about how to kill ghosts? But thinking about it, killing ghosts was too boring, so he was thinking about Wei Wei Bai. After Bai Bai finished speaking, it was time for the successor to go on stage to receive the award. No, it was time to say thank you. But after waiting for a while, Bai Bai couldn't even keep his smile. He didn't see anyone. An inner disciple hurried over and whispered a few words in his ear. Bai Bai's expression changed slightly. He immediately said a few words of comfort before leaving with the inner disciple. Many people were just here to go through the motions, so they didn't pay much attention. Even Wei Wei Bai was looking down to eat, so she didn't pay much attention to what just happened. After all, one would become numb after attending too many meetings and official news conferences. She waited numbly for it to end. On the other hand, Yu Moqian's gaze turned cold. Then, he stood behind Wei Wei Bai. This was his instinctive vigilance. Even if nothing happened, the slightest bit of abnormality would alert him. Wei Wei Bai seemed to sense that something was wrong with him. She looked up and asked, "What's wrong?" Yu Moqian revealed a gentle smile. "Nothing, I was just bored." Wei Wei Bai gave him a piece of dessert. "Eat something when you're bored." There was no taste in Yu Moqian's mouth. No matter how similar the drawing was, it was not a real person. But he managed to find sweetness in the tasteless dessert. It was delicious. Bai Bai's footsteps were messy as he walked into the inner hall. He saw Bai Mu lying on the bed. His body was stiff, his skin was festering and turning black, and he was twitching non-stop. Bai Bai knew at a glance that he had been possessed by something dirty. He immediately formed a seal with his fingers. A few yellow talismans lit up, and he slapped them on Bai Mu's body. But the yellow talismans immediately turned into ashes. A huge force hit Bai Bai so hard that he spat out blood. Bai Mu was attacked. He spat out black gas and roared at him with a ferocious expression. Bai Bai's heart was bleeding. He was the only child in the family. If he did not save him, the Imperial Dao sect would fall into the hands of the collateral family. No, Wei Wei Bai was still a direct descendant. But Wei Wei Bai did not know anything and did not know anything. How could he let her be the successor? Save button. Chapter 17:12. Bai Bai asked the people around him what had happened. Someone immediately answered that Bai Mu had touched the ghost formation. It was said that the center of the formation was a precious bead. After absorbing the power of the bead, one would become very powerful. Bai Bai was furious. That formation is used to catch evil ghosts. It has accumulated so much hatred and despair. You have been possessed by them. There's no way to save you. But he was his only grandson. Bai Bai remembered that the sect leader of the natural law school was still there. He immediately ran to the front hall to drink tea. If some big shots didn't want to squeeze in with the juniors, they would come here to drink tea. Bai Bai ran to the front hall. Through a bamboo screen, he saw the sect leader of the natural law school sitting inside. "What's wrong?" The sect leader's voice was still young, but for some reason, it gave people a feeling that he had been through a lot. Bai Bai immediately told him what had happened. "My grandson is too reckless. I know that you must have a way. If you can save my grandson's life, I will try my best to fulfill any conditions." The Imperial Path sect couldn't be compared to the natural law school. If it weren't for his grandson, Bai wouldn't have asked the natural law school for help. After all, they were in the same profession and hated each other. The natural law school looked down on the Imperial Path sect. The Imperial Path sect looked down on the natural law school for being hypocrites. Bai couldn't care less about scolding the natural law school for stealing his business. His successor was the most important thing. The sect leader pondered for a moment. This is not easy. The ghost formation in your school is a powerful treasure that even the founder of the natural law school said. If you enter it by mistake and are possessed by evil things, it's impossible to get rid of it, unless what? Just say it. Everyone was doing the same job. Everyone knew about each other's bad habits. Of course, Bai was still smiling. It was left by the founder. If you don't mind, you can take it and study it. The formation couldn't take it away, but it could be observed and studied. Bai felt like his heart was dripping blood. This was a guy who had to make a living. If this guy found something, the Imperial Path sect wouldn't be able to compete with the natural law school in the future. They would earn less money in the future. Bai Shin's heart was bleeding, but his grandson could still be saved. The sect leader nodded in satisfaction. This time, he had come for the ghost fiend array. Fearing that Bai would not allow him to study it, he even deliberately lured Bai Mu into the formation. As expected, Bai fell for it. The sect leader said, "There's only one way. Find a person with a pure yang body and throw him into the middle of the array. Then, release his blood to suppress the resentment of the malicious spirit. Once the resentment subsides, the ghost chi on your grandson's body will weaken. At that time, you can find a good jade and place it on your chest. Then, you can draw a high-grade yellow talisman and soak it in tea before drinking it. If the tea is replaced with the blood of a pure yang body, it will be more effective." When Bai heard this, he almost despaired. A pure yang body is hard to come by in 100 years. Where am I supposed to find one now? The sect leader smiled. You've asked the right person. Just now, I was bored and glanced at the bronze mirror. I saw a warm light coming from the hole. Bai trembled. You're saying that there's someone with a pure yang body among the people who came today? The sect leader nodded. It should be your sect's bloodline. Go to the main hall and look for someone with your searching magic treasure. People with a pure yang body were not easy to find. However, if they were nearby, it was very easy to get a simple searching magic treasure. Because people with a pure yang body were like light bulbs. They would respond with just a little feeling. At https://www.sashu.com/full text at https://www.sashu.com download text at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 1713. Bai was so excited that his whole body was trembling. If my grandson is saved, I will definitely repay you. The sect leader smiled and didn't say anything. Bai immediately ran to find him. The sect leader was silent. A disciple beside him asked, "Master, what's wrong?" The sect leader said softly, "I'm just thinking of an old friend." He remembered that young man with amazing talent who also had a rare pure yang body. Unfortunately, he had already turned into dust and bones, and even his soul had dissipated. Wei Bai drank too much. "I'm going to the washroom." Yu Moqian, who was still vigilant, blushed and silently moved away. Wei Bai specifically said, "Don't follow me. It's too eye-catching in the ladies' washroom." The men's and women's washrooms were on the east and west sides. If he followed her, it would be too eye-catching. And Yu Ma-chien, this ghost, attracted ghosts. Over the past few days, many ghosts had been killed because of his strong yin aura. She didn't want a hand to suddenly reach out of the toilet bowl when she went to the washroom. Yu Ma-chien's expression was a little wronged, and he nodded. But when Wei Wei Bai left, he still followed her. But when she walked into the ladies' washroom, he didn't follow her. There were no ghosts in the Imperial Dao sect. After all, they had been expelled by the array. But there was a ghost array. That array couldn't be entered in his spiritual form. After all, it was formed by the spirit energy of the first-generation Imperial Dao sect's ancestor. He remembered that the first-generation Imperial Dao sect's ancestor also had a pure yang body. A pure yang body was born to suppress evil ghosts. It was more effective than any Dharma treasure. So no matter how much evil ghost energy was gathered in the ghost array, it couldn't escape. He knew so much because he was suppressed back then. That array had some of the techniques of the ghost array. So Yu Ma-chien wasn't too worried about Wei Wei Bai. After all, when she met people, even he was afraid. He waited obediently. He silently thought about what kind of car to draw next time. As he waited, his pupils shrank, and he quickly ran to the ladies' washroom. Why couldn't he sense her aura? After Wei Wei Bai finished using the toilet and washed her hands, she saw Bai Bai running over anxiously with a small mirror in his hand. He couldn't believe it when he saw her. It's you. Wei Wei Bai, did she lose her memory again? Or did he not see any information? What was going on with Bai Bai's face that looked like he had met a heartless man? Wei Wei Bai smiled and said, "It's me, great uncle." Bai Bai's body trembled, and a trace of struggle flashed across his face. However, in the next moment, he became ruthless. Wei Wei Bai was not a kind person. When she saw that his expression was not right, she knew something was wrong. She immediately turned around and ran. But his legs suddenly couldn't move. She looked down and saw two pale hands gripping her feet from under the floorboards. Wei Wei Bai, who was not afraid of anything except ghosts, felt her legs turn to jelly. Tongzi. The system had been eating, drinking, and living a decadent life. Only when it heard its host's call did it react slowly. What the fuck? Where's Yu Ma-chien? Where's the guardian and the caretaker nanny? How did he disappear? The system immediately flipped through the information quickly. Damn it, you met bad people. They want to use you as a medicine man and bleed you. It was not that Wei Wei Bai did not want to call for Yu Ma-chien, but a pale hand was already covering her mouth. She could only call for the system. The system said calmly, "Don't worry, I'll go look for some life-saving goods." Wei Wei Bai could not panic because she was pulled into the floorboards and gradually disappeared. Bai Bai's eyes were cold as he turned around and left. This was his ability as a sect leader. Although he could not compare to his seniors, it was still easy for him to catch a junior. And he had just left. Yu Ma-chien had already appeared at the entrance of the washroom. His eyes were fierce as he quickly rushed to the place where Wei Wei Bai disappeared. He caught the scent of her disappearing breath. His 5 fingers fell to the ground. His dark eyes turned slightly red, and his expression was cold. 5-hand array. This array was very good for catching people. It was not difficult, but it was impossible to guard against. Who caught Wei Wei? Who was it? A green ghost aura appeared at Yu Ma-chien's fingertips. A golden light was also entwined with a greenish-gray color. An extremely complicated array appeared. Go and find her. The array turned into countless greenish-gold light spots and exploded in all directions. It turned into countless shooting stars and disappeared. Yu Ma-chien stood up, his head lowered under the shadow. His face was full of murderous intent, and the ghost aura began to overflow. Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://sashu.com/. Chapter 1714. The uncontrollable ghost energy in the golden light triggered a response from the defensive formation of the Imperial Path School. Some white light appeared, trying to capture the terrifying attack. However, it was shattered by the power of the golden light. The sect leader of the Natural Law School, who was sitting behind the bamboo curtain, suddenly trembled. The green jade pendant on his waist also made a crisp sound. He reached out and grabbed the air, catching a bit of the golden light. This feeling, this familiar formation, this was the Natural Law School's formation. The remnants of the golden formation were mixed with extremely cold ghost energy. The sect leader suddenly thought of something, and his face twisted. This familiar feeling. Could it be him? It was impossible. He was being suppressed. It was impossible for him to appear here. The disciple beside the sect leader asked worriedly, "Master, what's wrong?" The sect leader shook his head. Something big is going to happen here. If Yu Ma Qian had escaped from the suppression of the Great Array, it was very reasonable for him to appear here. It was because he wanted to take revenge. Yu Ma Qian must know that he was still alive by using some kind of secret technique. Yu Ma Qian was the one who brought people to throw him into the formation core. He must have come to take revenge as soon as he came out. The sect leader, who was Yu Sanqian, stood up slowly. "Bring me my case." No matter where he went, he never left his case. The disciple was shocked. After all, he needed to use the case. Yu Sanqian's expression was cold. He could kill Yu Ma Qian in the past. This time, he could even destroy his soul. The golden light rushed into the backyard. The talisman on the door of the Imperial Path School shook violently. It wanted to resist this power. However, it was torn apart by the golden light. The light entered the room and captured Wei Wei Bai's aura. Yu Ma Qian, who was next to the hall, suddenly opened his eyes. His bright black eyes were filled with bloody red. His thin lips were as red as blood, and his expression was not as tender as usual. "Found it," he said. He said softly, his tone indescribably frightening. He turned around and ran toward the backyard. His speed was frightening. The rest of the people only saw a black shadow flash by and thought that they were seeing things. Third great uncle was still holding a small flower pot. "We agreed to swallow it raw. You'll definitely be famous. I'll take a short video for you." Her cousin's face turned green. Her face was swollen from the slap, but her third granduncle kept laughing at her while holding a flower pot. They were all relatives, so they couldn't be so biased towards Wei Wei Bai. Just as the cousin was about to get angry, she saw a black shadow flash past. She also thought that she was seeing things. After all, this kind of speed was not something that a human could achieve. Even Olympic sprinters didn't have such inhuman speed. So she rubbed her eyes. Third great uncle said, "Did you see a ghost?" The cousin sneered, "There are no ghosts in this world. Only the older generation believes that." Third granduncle smiled but didn't say anything. Wei Wei Bai was tied up like a dumpling with a rope. Her mouth was taped as she was dragged into a room. In the room, a convulsing young man was emitting black gas. Was it burnt? Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "So I'll be drained of blood." The system said, your pure young body is very good because you bumped into it when you transmigrated. You don't need to bleed to suppress the vengeful spirit and save that little bastard just now. Wei Wei Bai said, that's not important. Will there be a lot of ghosts in the place where I'll be thrown later? The system said, isn't that obvious? It's not just a bunch. You can count the number of ghosts you've caught in the past few hundred years. Even if most of the ghosts are gone, the ones that are left are very powerful. / Chapter 17:15. You can search Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come to search book, www.sashu.com, in Baidu to find the S. After all the weak points had been eliminated. Wei Wei Bai asked, where's the life-saving item I said? The system said, I bought you some supplements, tomato and vegetable juice to replenish your blood. Drink more when your blood is drained. I guarantee you won't die. Wei Wei Bai said. How is that a life-saving item? Give me a weapon that can destroy everything. Give me a sword that can burn the heavens and destroy the earth and send them to the afterlife with one slash. The system said, 1 million life points. Wei Wei Bai said, tomato juice sounds delicious. Drink more. The system was speechless. Wei Wei Bai sighed, where's my perfect and gentle little nanny who can catch ghosts? The system said, he's looking for you. Wei Wei Bai said, waiting for him until his blood is almost dry. The system was speechless. This plane was too easy to survive. Even the targets had become nannies. Look at the host's depraved state. Where was the self-reliant host in the past? The host in the past had a brain that worked 24/7. Every day, it was always on guard and would not stop until it was flying. Now, it did not even recognize this host who was waiting for death. The system silently ate its dried salted fish. But the taste of waiting for death was delicious. Bai Bai looked at his grandson who was emitting black energy and his heart ached. He took out a knife and cut Wei Wei Bai's wrist. Blood flowed from her wrist and fell into the bowl. The system immediately poured tomato juice into Wei Wei Bai's mouth. Drink more. You need to drink a can of tomato juice to recover from this old thief stab. Although it was not a physical drink, it was a direct effect on the body. But there was the taste of tomato juice in her mouth. It was quite delicious. After drinking it, there was no pain, no weakness, not even a blur in her eyes. It was no different from usual. Bai Bai fed the blood to Bai Mu to temporarily suppress the ghostly energy. Seeing that his grandson was better, he immediately said, open the altar and activate the formation of spirits. The formation of spirits was something left behind by their ancestors. If there was no other choice, they could not use it. Because he didn't have the ability, he was afraid that he would go overboard. Once the formation went out of control, it was no laughing matter. However, Wei Wei Bai had a pure yang body. A pure yang body was the best suppressor for the array core. If Wei Wei Bai was lucky enough not to die from the bleeding this time. If he trapped her in the middle of the array would be very safe in the future. When Bai Bai became ruthless, he would even use his own family's younger generation. After all, most of the people in the Imperial Dao sect were swindlers. There were normal people, but there were even more vicious people. Bai Bai was naturally the ruthless type. Apart from his own grandson, he would take advantage of the rest, no matter how close they were. He looked at Wei Wei Bai, who was tied up like a dumpling. He even felt that he had been too careless earlier. With such a good aptitude, he should have kept her by his side long ago. Brainwashing a child from a young age might be able to produce a loyal child. That way, he wouldn't have to tie them up when something happened, which would lead to too many troublesome matters in the future. The altar was quickly set up. Bai carefully brought over a blood-red box. He placed the box in the middle of the altar. Then, he opened it. It was a red stone that emitted an ominous aura. Bai picked up a bowl of yellow talisman water, poured it into his mouth, and sprayed it on the stone. The stone immediately emitted a strange light. Waves of terrifying roars erupted from within the stone. Bai retreated in fear. This was the result of the 10,000 ghosts in the array being agitated. Immediately, countless red rays of light rushed out of the stone and gathered into a huge ghost array in the shape of the 8 trigrams. Chapter 17:16. Those ferocious ghost heads were restrained in place, unable to move forward. Bai's forehead was covered in cold sweat. Every time he activated the formation, he was risking his life. Bai was placed on a chair, the wound on her wrist was not bandaged, and blood dripped down. The blood fell to the ground, and some of the ghosts on the periphery immediately retreated, fear on their faces. Bai's eyes lit up, and he looked at Bai. This was a treasure. A treasure to suppress the formation. With the ability to control the formation of spirits infinitely. There was no need for him to bow to the people of the Natural Tao sect, he could be on equal footing with them in the future. Bai looked at the ghosts and was speechless for a while, then said, "If I knew this would happen, I would have swapped with Yu Maqian from the start, and I would have suppressed Yu Maqian's formation, at least I would have gained favorability." The system said, "That's true, but can you not tremble so much?" Bai said, "Tongzi, I see a lot of ghosts." The system said, "Eat more, the kind that observes carefully, you won't be afraid if you see more." Bai said, "I'm still scared." The system silently poured tomato juice into her mouth. "Eat more, and you won't be afraid of anything. Ghosts are not scary, not having anything to eat is scarier." On the formation of spirits, all kinds of ghosts were struggling. The people outside the formation were all shocked by this scene. Bai's palms were sweating, he took out a dozen high-level yellow talismans, grabbed Bai's wrist, and drew the talismans with blood. Then, he asked his disciples to stick the talismans outside the formation. This was to prevent the ghosts from escaping. Then, Bai took out his peachwood sword and tapped on the formation. A red blood door appeared in the formation. Bai's eyes were red, and he shouted, "Release the blood, push the person in." Bai felt another cut on her wrist, cutting off the blood vessels, and blood immediately gushed out. This was a suicidal way to cut one's wrist. The system immediately poured tomato juice into her mouth. Replenished the blood that had flowed out. Bai began to feel a little dizzy. This was a reaction to excessive blood loss. Although the tomato juice could replenish the blood, some of the reactions couldn't be suppressed. She was pushed into the blood door. The ghosts in the blood door wanted to escape, but the bloody Bai entered the door. The ghosts screamed in agony and left the door in pain. Bai, why did he feel that she was scarier than a ghost? Even ghosts ran away when they saw her. The door was closed. Bai and a few other disciples looked coldly at Bai. Their eyes flashed with excitement, as if they were looking at some rare treasure. It was new and exciting, but inhumane. As her blood slowly flowed out, a bunch of ghosts were killed by the power of this blood. Bai immediately said, "Quick, bring my grandson here." Only by coming into contact with Bai Mu at such a close distance would he be able to expel the ghostly aura from Bai Mu's body faster. The disciple immediately nodded and quickly went to bring him over. Bai lay in the array and looked at the ghosts running around, not daring to come over. Drinking the tomato juice, she said to the system, "I'm suddenly not afraid of ghosts." They didn't see any ghosts, but when they saw her, they had to take a detour. The trauma of many years was about to be healed. Suddenly, she was lifted up by a white skeleton. Bai Weiwei's eyes widened as she stared at a skull. The skull flashed with a blue light. Heal, my foot. The shadow became heavier. So scary. The skull laughed, pure young body, I haven't seen one in many years. Blood is a good thing to restrain us, but unfortunately, I have a treasure that can restrain the pure young body. I can't let you kill all these little ghosts. At https://www.sashu.com/full text at https://www.sashu.com download text at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 1717. For so many years, the ghosts and evil spirits had been fighting against each other. Weiwei Bai's arrival was like a nuclear bomb, killing most of the ghosts. If this went on, all the ghosts would be destroyed by the array. The skull stretched out its white bony fingers. The bony fingers were strangely long. It said, "Die for me." Weiwei Bai said, "Tongzi, the life-saving item, hey, hey." The system roared, "Okay, I'll help you call you Ma Qian, ah." Weiwei Bai, just as the system finished roaring, a golden ray of light, like the tip of a sword, came from afar with an unstoppable force, cutting through all obstacles. The power of the ray of light almost blinded everyone's eyes. The red array's strange red mist shook violently. The skull was shocked. The golden ray of light had already broken through the red array's defense line, shattering its skull. Weiwei Bai was thrown to the ground again. The skull fell from the neck and rolled until it reached her feet. It stared at her with its dark eyes. Weiwei Bai struggled to get up from the ground, blood still flowing from her wrist. She wanted to stop the bleeding, but seeing the ghost staring at her, she didn't dare to approach. She could only drink her tomato juice silently. Bai Bai saw that a corner of the array was broken and his expression changed. He immediately stuck a yellow talisman on it and shouted coldly, "Which expert has arrived?" Just as he finished speaking, the front door was kicked open. An extremely nimble figure appeared before everyone's eyes. Bai Bai immediately picked up his peachwood sword and flew over, wanting to kill the person. In the end, Yu Ma Qian didn't see it. He reflexively pulled out his peachwood sword with a red tassel and smashed Bai Bai's wrist. Then, he lifted his leg and kicked away the eyesore. He turned his head. His black eyes were deep and strange. Even the depths of his black pupils were red. His tang suit made him look even colder and more terrifying. He saw Weiwei Bai standing in the array formation in a daze. Her wrists, palms, and clothes were all stained with blood. Her face was a little pale. Surrounded by a bunch of ghosts, she shivered and looked indescribably pitiful. Yu Ma Qian felt a sudden tug in his heart. This tugging pain came fiercely and violently. The pain was like a sharp blade stabbing into his heart or a sledgehammer cracking his bones. It was so painful that it cracked. He gritted his teeth, and his handsome, youthful face turned ferocious. All the items on the altar began to tremble. With a brush, the yellow talisman began to shatter. Yu Ma Qian charged into the baleful ghost array, and his body was suddenly attacked by a terrifying attack. The red light of 1,000 cuts cut into his body. Yu Ma Qian held his sword horizontally in front of his eyes, while his other hand pinched the red tassel. He roared fiercely, "Break!" The red light shattered into specks of light, leaving only small wounds on his body. Bye-bye, who was seriously injured and vomiting blood, was about to laugh when he saw Yumachin charge into the baleful ghost array. When he saw that Yumachin was actually able to contend with the power of the baleful ghost array, his face turned green. Where did this guy come from? Even the sect master of the Heavenly Tao sect, Yu Sanqian, had to carefully approach the array formation. This man, who had charged in, was actually not torn apart by the ghosts. Yumachin's ghostly aura made the ghosts not dare to approach him. Wei Wei Bai had yang aura, while he had ghostly aura. Neither of them were to be trifled with. The formation began to vibrate, and countless strands of blood appeared from the ground. They began to entangle Yumachin. However, Yumachin acted as if he couldn't see it. He walked step by step toward Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai wasn't affected much, but she was bleeding too much. Even with the tomato juice, she felt dizzy. She walked towards Yumachin with swaying steps. Although it was a large array, it was only a dozen or so steps. Both of them were having a hard time walking. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai staggered. She looked down and saw that she had tripped over a white hand bone. She trembled. It was like a graveyard. Before she could finish trembling, a tattered body had already reached out and hugged her. Yumachin's body was penetrated by blood threads. It looked abnormally scary. However, he seemed to be unaware of it. He reached out and held her bleeding wrist. The blood on it soaked his palm, and his palm began to rot. The blood that restrained ghosts was especially warm as magma. Wei Wei Bai saw that his palm was beginning to rot. Her expression changed, and she wanted to withdraw her hand. However, she realized that Yumachin was holding it tightly. He placed her hand on his face. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes trembled. She was a little confused. Blood stained his delicate and fair face, and it began to rot. Yumachin's red eyes showed intense pain. He murmured softly, looking extremely obedient. "I'm sorry. I didn't protect you well. //." Chapter 17-18. Wei Wei Bai was silent as she stared at his rotting face. There were no bones, only a layer of skin, and it was dissolved by her blood. It was indescribably terrifying as it dissolved bit by bit. But for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. Those shadows of ghosts and monsters were melted away by Yumachin's gaze. His gaze was too pure and sorrowful. For a moment, it cancelled out all the terrifying phenomena. She said softly, "I'm fine." After drinking so much tomato juice, she had recovered quite a bit of blood. Yumachin only had half of his face left. He forced a smile as a fountain pen appeared in his hand. He quickly drew a healing talisman and a white bandage. He stuck the talisman onto the wound on her wrist and quickly wrapped the bandage around it. His body also began to dissipate. Even his voice became indistinct. "I said I would draw you a man who wouldn't dissolve, but I still broke my promise." After saying this, Yumachin's body turned into a line and completely disappeared into thin air. He was wearing a navy blue robe with a black braid hanging behind him. His eyes were dark and had a blood-red glow. It was an extremely strange sight as he floated in the air. After he appeared, the evil spirit array was completely activated. The evil spirit's aura made the array feel unsafe. It needed to erase this powerful evil spirit's aura. Yumachin turned around and squatted down. He pulled her back and let her lie on his back. Wei Wei Bai felt the familiar coldness of his body. She said to the system, "Is this array difficult for Yumachin?" The system flipped through the information. "It's a little difficult, but it's possible to break out." The place where Yu-Ma-Chen was suppressed was many times larger than this array. The problem was that Yu-Ma-Chen was currently in his spiritual body. His true strength was hidden in his sleeping body. So for a spiritual Yu-Ma-Chen, he still had to pay a price to break out of this place. Bai Weiwei looked at his pale neck, and the delicate and beautiful outline of his ears. She could almost see the perfect curve of his jaw. She sighed. I can't bear to be a salted fish anymore. After all, he's pretty good. Those crazy targets in the past, one after another, they were tormented. She couldn't be blamed for thinking about how to torture people to death every day. Although she didn't have any emotional fluctuations, her personality was the kind of person who would repay favors and revenge. Now, seeing Yu-Ma-Chen so sad and pitiful, it was rare that she felt that it wasn't a good idea to be lazy. In this plane, she had basically won by doing nothing. She couldn't be bothered to use her brain, so she let Yu-Ma-Chen do the work alone. The system was also munching on potato chips. A lazy salted fish won't do. This plane of yours is basically just waiting for death to come. Bai Weiwei, put down the chips in your hand, salted fish. The system still had the nerve to scold her. It was the biggest salted fish. The system silently put down the potato chips and took a bite of the pineapple cake. Weiwei Bai said, I can't have more than 100 life points. Give me something that can really save my life. The system flipped through the discount supermarket. 100 life points. This was 100,000 life points before the discount. Weiwei Bai's eyes lit up. Buy. I've earned 99,900 life points for free. The system said, this is the one with the 100,000 life points flaw. There's only one. Weiwei Bai asked, is the flaw very big? Could it be that it couldn't be used at all? The system said, it's not too big or too small. If you use this thing, you won't be able to use any supermarket products in this world. The supermarket will lock you down. Bai Weiwei. At the /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here and read this on your phone, https://m/sashu.com record. Chapter 1719. Although the system's supermarket had a bunch of useless things, sometimes they could find good things to save lives. If this plane completely locked onto the supermarket, Weiwei Bai felt that it was dangerous. Because this was the first time she was facing the problem of whether or not to lock the supermarket. It was a useless problem. If she said lock it, she didn't know if there would be any side effects if she didn't lock it. If she said not to lock it, 100,000 defective products would definitely be good. Just as Weiwei Bai was in a dilemma, thousands of blood threads suddenly appeared in the array, covering the sky and earth. The blood threads pierced a ghost, and the ghost would let out a tragic cry. Some malicious ghosts quickly fled to the weak parts of the array and hid. Every time the array was activated, many malicious ghosts would die. The array required a huge amount of energy to activate. If the array determined that there were no super malicious ghosts, it would usually be in a half-stop state. The redness in Yu-Ma-Chen's eyes intensified. He raised his hand and grabbed his peachwood sword. Countless red tassels flew and exploded. Countless red tassels intertwined with the red blood threads. Those blood threads were entangled into a ball. They couldn't attack anymore. Yu-Ma-Chen quickly came to the edge of the array. This array was actually very powerful. But the strength of the person who activated it was too bad. So bad that this array could only maintain basic vigilance and basic attack power. If it was an expert, he would have the ability to completely activate all the power of the array. He was already in a sorry state now. Yu-Mo-Chien glanced at the simple yellow talismans outside the array. It was really hard to explain. It wasn't that the ancestor of the Imperial Path sect didn't leave behind anything good. Why was it that after being ruined by this group of juniors, the good things were like dog shit? Yu-Mo-Chien glanced at Bai, who was still vomiting blood and lying on the ground. He couldn't help but shake his head in disappointment. No wonder Bai's aptitude was so good. In the end, she didn't know anything. With such a trash sect leader, she was lucky that she wasn't killed. How could they expect him to teach Bai? Yu-Mo-Chien couldn't help but look sideways at Bai. She was obediently lying on his back, her eyelashes half closed, and the brightness in her eyes had dimmed quite a bit. The lack of blood made her look sick. Yu-Mo-Chien's irritable and uncomfortable feeling ran out again. It wasn't easy for him to raise a child. How could he let others ruin it like this? The Imperial Path sect didn't want her, but he wanted her. It was a rare physique that was hard to come by even in 100 years. This kind of tender feeling made Yu-Mo-Chien have a very good impression of Bai from the start. Later on, step by step, he took her under his protection. In the depths of Yu-Mo-Chien's black and red eyes, there was an incomparably cold emotion surging. A strange fluctuation appeared in his numb and lifeless eyes. He floated into the air and drew in the air with his sword. Countless bright yellow talismans appeared. The talismans on his yellow talismans gave off a dazzling golden light. When Bai saw those yellow talismans, his eyes narrowed. He almost couldn't believe it. Heavenly Dao talismans. They were the most advanced talismans in the Heavenly Dao sect. Not many of the new generation in the Heavenly Dao sect could draw them. But this malicious ghost who had barged into the evil ghost formation could actually draw so many talismans at once. Bai screamed at the top of his lungs, "Guard the formation door. Don't let him escape." Some disciples immediately took out countless talismans and stuck them outside the evil ghost formation in an attempt to strengthen the formation. The evil ghost formation was stimulated, and the red blood threads turned into beams of terrifying red blood light. Under the formation, some unknown and strange blood chi appeared. https://www.sashu.com/full text https://www.sashu.com download text https://www.sashu.com Chapter 1720. The malicious spirits that had been sleeping to resist the formation were awakened by this wave of energy. Ghost heads popped out from under the formation and roared at Yu-Mo-Chien. Yu-Mo-Chien looked down coldly. His eyes were cold and emotionless, but they carried a sense of arrogance. It was as if he was looking at ants. Those malicious spirits actually cowered, and some of them retracted their heads. Yu-Mo-Chien raised the tip of his sword, and the yellow talismans formed a circle around the formation. Some of them collided with the outer formation door, shaking the entire Ghost Fiend formation. The talismans outside the formation began to spontaneously combust. Yu-Mo-Chien stepped on the red weapons, and he felt a stinging sensation from the soles of his feet. These things were used to corrode spirit bodies. They didn't have much of an effect on humans. Yu-Mo-Chien still didn't feel reassured, so he stuck a yellow talisman on her body. It had a protective effect. He felt her reach out and gently press her fingers against his cold neck, as if she was very worried. Yu-Mo-Chien couldn't help but smile. Then, he stepped on the flying yellow talismans and rushed out of the formation. As long as he sent Bai out, this kind of small situation wouldn't cause him much harm. But when his yellow talisman shook the formation door, a crack appeared. A jade pendant rang out. He looked up, and his eyes turned cold. You Sanchen. But how could you Sanchen still be alive? How many years had it been? He was at least 140 years old. A person couldn't live that long. Yu Maqian's eyes turned completely red. The black color disappeared, and red lines appeared on his face. They were exquisite and frightening. He stabbed the peachwood sword into the formation, scaring the malicious spirits away. Then, he took out a fountain pen and quickly drew a black formation in the air. The formation was terrifyingly complex. All kinds of yin and yang forces of heaven and earth were gathered together, and in the end, they reached a terrifying balance. The red gas suddenly began to sway. The black formation slowly rotated. In the middle of the large red formation, a small but refined black formation was slowly suppressing the large formation. Bai and the rest of the disciples who had not seen the world were dumbstruck. Even Bai was at the level of half a bucket of water. He had never seen such a terrifying and profound array formation before. Even if the Ghost Fiend array was unable to unleash its full power, it was still one of the most famous and powerful arrays. He was actually suppressed by Yu Maqian just like that. Yu Maqian floated in the air and whispered to Wei Bai, "We can get out, don't worry." Wei Bai's voice was calm and gentle. "With you here, I'm not worried." He trusted her so wholeheartedly. Yu Maqian was stunned for a moment before a smile appeared on his face. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 55. Just as the black array moved to the position that Yu Maqian wanted, he suddenly drew a door with his hand. The door opened above the black magic array. This was something that had been forcefully created. Wei Bai looked up and saw that it was completely dark outside the door. Yu Maqian was very calm as he quickly flew towards the door. But as soon as his fingers touched the door opened. His red eyes filled with killing intent and a terrifying power erupted from his body as he retreated backwards. An ancient bronze mirror fell from the sky and smashed through a corner of the black magic array, smashing into the center of the Ghost Fiend array. The Ghost Fiend array seemed to have received a large amount of power. The red gas that had been on the verge of death turned into a bloody mist. The mist began to condense into a blood-like substance. The blood began to surge under their feet. Yu Maqian looked at the ancient bronze mirror and coldly turned his head. He gritted his teeth and said, "Yu Maqian. Transmigration system, male god, come here, /transmigration system, male god, come here, / transmigration system, male god, come here." The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.